Hey guys, tonight we begin an incredible journey through medieval mysteries that have finally been solved. Here's something that'll blow your mind. For 670 years, every single history book got it wrong about what killed 200 million people. That's more than the entire population of Brazil today. And 3 years ago, scientists cracked open medieval teeth and discovered the real killer. What they found will make you question everything you thought you knew about pandemics. You know what? If this story gives you chills like it did me, hit that subscribe button now. I promise these medieval mysteries will keep you up at night, but in the best way possible. And I'm curious, are you listening to this tucked in bed, or maybe walking your dog? Let me know in the comments where these ancient secrets are finding you tonight. Now picture this. London, 1348. You're walking down a cobblestone street and the first thing that hits you isn't what you see, it's what you smell. Death. But not just any death. Something else. Something wrong. Bodies stacked like firewood outside every church. Entire families wiped out in days. Children crying for parents who will never wake up. The living have stopped counting the dead because, honestly, what's the point? This is the Black Death, and it's devouring Europe like a hungry beast. But here's where our story gets interesting, and I mean really interesting. For centuries, we had this pandemic figured out. The story went like this. Evil bacteria from mysterious Asia, carried by rats on merchant ships, bringing exotic death to innocent Europe. Hollywood loved it, textbooks taught it, professors lectured about it, case closed, right? Wrong. So incredibly, spectacularly wrong. What if I told you that in 2021 a team of scientists essentially travelled back in time to interview the actual victims? Not through dusty books or ancient paintings, but through something far more reliable, their DNA. Dr. Johannes Krauss from the Max Planck Institute, and yes, that's a mouthful, did something that medieval people could never imagine. He went straight to the source, the teeth of plague victims buried in London's East Smithfield Cemetery. Now here's the mind-blowing part that still gives me goosebumps. When someone dies from plague, the bacteria actually get trapped in their tooth pulp, creating perfect genetic time capsules that survive for hundreds of years. These medieval victims have been waiting nearly 7 centuries to tell us what really happened to them. Picture a modern laboratory, sterile and bright. A scientist carefully drills into a 6 and 70-year-old tooth, hoping to find molecular evidence of history's greatest killer. It sounds like science fiction, but this is happening right now in labs across the world. And what they discovered changed everything. Everything! The DNA evidence revealed something that made every expert do a double take. The Black Death didn't come from Asia like we'd believed for so long. The genetic fingerprints pointed to Central Asia, specifically modern-day Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan. That might not sound shocking until you realize what this means. Dr. Maria Spiro's groundbreaking 2022 research in Nature magazine traced the plague's actual journey with GPS-like precision. According to her DNA detective work, the Black Death began its killing spree around 1338, 1339, a full decade before it reached Europe. While Europeans were living their normal lives, this invisible assassin was already stalking westward, caravan by caravan, city by city. But wait, there's more. And this part still haunts me. The plague that devastated medieval Europe was actually a recent mutation of an ancient bacterial family that had been lurking in Central Asian rodents for thousands of years. Think about that. Nature had been perfecting this biological weapon for millennia, and around 1338, it finally achieved deadly perfection. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but does it really matter where it came from? Dead is dead, right? Oh, but it matters. It matters so much. Understanding the true origin completely changes how we view medieval Europe's place in the world. More importantly, it's revolutionizing how we prepare for future pandemics. As Dr. Hendrik Poynar from McMaster University puts it, when we understand the real pathways of historical pandemics, we're not just solving puzzles, we're creating survival guides for humanity's future. Here's something that'll make your skin crawl in the most fascinating way. The same DNA analysis that revealed the plague's origins also decoded something else. The desperate, unsuccessful fight that each victim's immune system waged against this microscopic invader. Reading about 25 million dead in a history book is one thing. Seeing the molecular evidence of individual medieval people's final biological battle for survival, preserved in their teeth for nearly 700 years, that's something else entirely. It's like these victims are finally getting to tell their side of the story. Dr. Kirsten Boss made another chilling discovery. The medieval Black Death strain is the direct ancestor of every plague case happening anywhere in the world today. Every single one. That pandemic that changed European history forever, its descendants are still out there, still killing people in 2024. This isn't just historical trivia, it's a wake-up call. Climate change is reshaping the habitats where plague-carrying rodents live, potentially creating new pathways for disease spread. By understanding how the medieval pandemic really began, we're building better defenses against similar threats lurking in our modern world. As Dr. David Wagner from Northern Arizona University warns in his 2021 study, understanding Yersinia pestis evolution isn't academic curiosity, it's survival preparation for the human species. Think about this. Through cutting-edge science, we've given medieval plague victims a voice they never had. Through their teeth, through their DNA, they're finally correcting the history books and warning us about dangers we might face. It's like having a 700-year conversation about survival. The Black Death didn't just kill, it transformed Europe forever. The massive death toll created labor shortages that empowered surviving workers, ultimately helping end feudalism. History's greatest disaster inadvertently planted seeds for the modern world we live in today. But speaking of transformation through tragedy, our next mystery involves one of England's most controversial kings and a forensic revelation that makes Shakespeare's version look like a fairy tale. Modern science has finally reconstructed King Richard III's brutal final moments, and what really happened in that battlefield will shock you to your core. So we've just uncovered how medieval teeth became time machines that rewrote pandemic history. But what if I told you that in 2012, archaeologists found something even more shocking under a parking lot in Leicester, England? The remains of one of history's most vilified kings, and the forensic evidence painted a completely different picture than the one we've believed for over 500 years. Richard III. Just hearing that name probably brings up images from Shakespeare's play, right? The hunchbacked villain who murdered innocent children, scheming his way to the throne before meeting his well-deserved end. A horse! A horse! My kingdom for a horse. But here's the thing that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about medieval history. Modern science just proved that almost everything we knew about Richard III was wrong. Let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered how much of the history you learned in school was actually propaganda written by the winners? Drop a comment and let me know what historical fact you've always been suspicious about. Because Richard III's story is about to blow your mind. Picture this. August 2012, a parking lot behind a social services building in Leicester. Dr. Richard Buckley from the University of Leicester Archaeological Services is standing over what looks like just another pile of old bones. But within hours, this discovery would rewrite 527 years of history and solve one of England's greatest mysteries. The skeleton they found wasn't just any medieval remains. This was Richard III, the last Plantagenet King of England, killed at the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485. And the forensic evidence of his final moments? It's more brutal and heartbreaking than anything Hollywood has ever created. Dr. Sarah Hainsworth, a forensic pathologist from Leicester University, spent months analysing every mark, every fracture, every wound on these ancient bones. What she discovered was nothing short of extraordinary. And I'm warning you now, the real story of Richard III's death is going to haunt your dreams tonight. Here's what actually happened in those final moments at Bosworth Field, reconstructed with scientific precision that would make CSI investigators jealous. The forensic evidence shows Richard III died from not one, not two, but 11 separate wounds. 11. Let that sink in for a moment. This wasn't a quick, honourable death in battle like the history books claimed. This was something far more savage. Dr. Hainsworth's analysis, published in the Lancet Medical Journal in 2014, revealed the shocking truth. 2 wounds to the skull were fatal, a large sharp force trauma to the base of the skull that would have penetrated deep into the brain, and a penetrating injury to the right side of the skull. But here's where the story gets absolutely chilling. The majority of Richard's wounds were inflicted after he was already dead or dying. This wasn't combat, this was medieval rage unleashed on a fallen king. The forensic evidence suggests that Richard III was literally hacked to pieces by his enemies, even after he'd already fallen. But wait, it gets even more shocking. Professor Lynn Foxhall, head of Leicester's School of Archaeology, made a discovery that changed everything we thought we knew about Richard's character. Remember Shakespeare's famous hunchbacked villain? The forensic analysis revealed that Richard III did have scoliosis, a curved spine, but it was nowhere near as severe as depicted in Tudor propaganda. In fact, Dr. Piers Mitchell, a specialist in ancient diseases from Cambridge University, determined that Richard's spinal curvature would have made him appear only slightly shorter on one side, and it wouldn't have significantly affected his movement or fighting ability. The man who died at Bosworth was a capable warrior, not the twisted monster of legend. Here's something that gave me absolute chills when I first learned about it. Joe Appleby, the osteologist who first examined Richard's remains, discovered something remarkable about his final battle. The forensic evidence shows that Richard III fought to his very last breath. Despite being outnumbered, despite facing certain death, he kept fighting until the end. The wound patterns tell a story of incredible bravery or incredible desperation. Richard III died with his weapons in his hands, surrounded by enemies, refusing to surrender. This wasn't the cowardly villain of Shakespeare's imagination. This was a king who chose to die fighting rather than flee or beg for mercy. But here's where modern forensic science becomes almost supernatural in its precision. Dr. Sarah Hainsworth was able to determine not just how Richard died, but even the types of weapons that killed him. The fatal blow to the base of his skull? That came from a halberd, a medieval weapon that combined an axe, a spike, and a hook on a long pole. Think about the final moment. Richard III, the last Plantagenet king, surrounded by enemies on a blood-soaked battlefield. A halberd swings down, and 527 years of history comes to a violent end. The forensic evidence suggests he probably died instantly from that blow, which honestly might have been a mercy considering what his enemies did to his body afterward. Now, here's something that'll make your blood boil with righteous anger on behalf of a man who's been dead for over 5 centuries. The DNA analysis didn't just confirm Richard III's identity, it also proved that the Tudor propaganda machine had been lying about him for hundreds of years. Professor Kevin Schurer from Leicester University's Department of Genetics led the DNA analysis that confirmed the skeleton's identity. But beyond identification, The genetic evidence revealed something profound about medieval politics and the power of propaganda. This same Richard III, who was portrayed as a child-murdering monster. The forensic evidence suggests he was actually quite handsome, despite his slight spinal curvature. Facial reconstruction specialists from the University of Dundee, led by Professor Caroline Wilkinson, used the skull to recreate Richard's actual appearance. What they found was shocking. Richard III had a strong jawline, intelligent eyes, and what can only be described as a noble bearing. This wasn't the twisted creature of Tudor imagination. This was a king who looked the part. But here's the part that really gets to me, and I think it will get to you too. The isotope analysis of Richard's teeth, yes, those medieval time capsules again, revealed details about his childhood and diet that paint a picture of a man far different from the villain of legend. Dr. Angela Lamb from the British Geological Survey analysed the chemical signatures in Richard's teeth and bones. The evidence showed that Richard had a surprisingly healthy diet rich in marine fish and high-quality protein, suggesting someone who cared about physical fitness and martial training. This wasn't a weak, corrupted villain. This was a medieval king who took his physical and military responsibilities seriously. The man who died at Bosworth Field was in fighting shape, ready for battle and determined to defend his crown. The forensic evidence also revealed something that Shakespeare never mentioned. Richard III's final battle was fought on foot, not horseback. The famous cry, "A horse! A horse! My kingdom for a horse!" appears to be pure theatrical fiction. The real Richard III chose to fight on the ground, sword in hand, facing his enemies directly. Dr. Glenn Ford, battlefield archaeologist at the University of Huddersfield, used metal detection and historical analysis to reconstruct the actual Battle of Bosworth. His research, published in the Journal of Conflict Archaeology in 2013, revealed that Richard's final charge was a calculated military decision, not the desperate act of a cornered coward. Richard III saw an opportunity to end the battle quickly by striking directly at Henry Tudor, the future Henry VII. It was a bold, intelligent, tactical move that almost worked. If Richard had succeeded in killing Henry Tudor, English history would have taken a completely different path. Instead, Richard's charge put him deep in enemy territory, isolated from his own forces. The forensic evidence suggests he fought brilliantly for several minutes before being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. This was courage, not cowardice, but perhaps the most haunting discovery came from Professor Sarah Hainsworth's analysis of the post-mortem wounds. The evidence suggests that after Richard III fell, his enemies stripped his body naked and subjected it to what can only be described as ritualized humiliation. Medieval chroniclers mentioned that Richard's body was trussed naked across a horse and displayed publicly. The forensic evidence confirms this shameful treatment of a fallen king. For a medieval ruler, this kind of post-death humiliation was considered worse than the death itself. And yet, 527 years later, science has given Richard III something his enemies tried to take away: his dignity. Every bone, every wound, every piece of forensic evidence tells the story of a man who faced impossible odds with courage and died as a king should, fighting for his crown. The DNA analysis also solved another mystery that had puzzled historians for centuries. Richard III had no surviving descendants, which meant the Plantagenet dynasty, one of the most powerful royal houses in European history, ended with him on that battlefield in 1485. Professor Turi King from Leicester University, who led the genetic identification project, put it beautifully. In death, Richard III has finally been able to tell his own story, free from the propaganda of his enemies. Think about that. For over 5 centuries, history was written by Henry Tudor's supporters who had every reason to portray Richard as a monster to justify their rebellion. But bones don't lie. DNA doesn't have political agendas. Forensic evidence doesn't care about Tudor propaganda. The real Richard III, the one revealed by modern science, was a capable king, a skilled warrior, and a man who died with honour on a medieval battlefield. Was he perfect? Probably not. But was he the twisted villain of Shakespeare's imagination? Absolutely not. This discovery raises fascinating questions about how much of medieval history has been distorted by political propaganda. If the Tudors could successfully demonize Richard III for over 500 years, what other historical villains might actually be victims of ancient spin campaigns? You know what this makes me think about? It makes me wonder about the stories we tell ourselves today, and how future archaeologists might view our current narratives. Will they dig up evidence in 500 years that proves we got everything wrong too? The Richard III discovery proves something profound. Truth has a way of surfacing eventually, even after centuries of lies. Science doesn't care about political convenience or historical narratives. It only cares about facts. And sometimes those facts reveal that the real story is far more human, far more complex, and far more tragic than the simplified version we've been told. Now, speaking of medieval realities that completely contradict our modern assumptions, our next mystery involves something that will fundamentally change how you think about ancient engineering. While we pride ourselves on modern construction techniques, medieval builders developed a concrete formula so superior to ours that their structures have survived for over 1,000 years, while our buildings crumble after decades. The secret they discovered? It's about to revolutionize everything we know about building for the future. We've just witnessed how science vindicated a king whose reputation was destroyed by centuries of lies. But sometimes, the most shocking discoveries aren't about people at all. They're about the very ground beneath our feet. Here's a fact that will make every modern engineer question their entire career. Buildings we construct today with our advanced technology are designed to last maybe 50 to 100 years. Meanwhile, medieval structures built over 1,000 years ago are still standing strong, and they're actually getting stronger with age. I'm talking about concrete so superior to ours that it literally heals itself when it cracks, and until 2023 we had no idea how they did it. But now, scientists have cracked the code, and it's about to revolutionize how we build everything from bridges to skyscrapers. Before we dive into this engineering miracle, I'm curious, have you ever walked past an old building and wondered why it looks better than the modern one next to it? Let me know in the comments. What's the oldest structure you've seen that made you question our so-called progress? Let me paint you a picture that'll make your head spin. The Pantheon in Rome, built in 126 AD, has a concrete dome that's been standing for nearly 1,900 years. Not only is it still structurally sound, but engineers today admit they couldn't build something that durable using modern techniques. Meanwhile, the concrete highway you drive on, it starts cracking within 5 years and needs complete replacement every 20 to 30 years. What's even more mind-blowing is that this isn't just about Roman concrete. Medieval builders somehow perfected these techniques and kept using them well into the Middle Ages. Churches, castles, and cathedrals built 800 to 1,000 years ago are still standing strong, while modern buildings from the 1960s are already being demolished as structural failures. How is this possible? How did medieval builders with no modern equipment, no chemical laboratories, no engineering degrees, create concrete that's superior to anything we can make today? Well, Dr. Admir Masick from MIT just solved this 1,000-year-old mystery, and what he discovered is going to blow your mind. For decades, scientists assumed that the white chunks they found in ancient concrete were just impurities. Mistakes made by sloppy medieval workers who didn't know what they were doing. Turns out those impurities were actually the secret ingredient that made their concrete nearly indestructible. Dr. Masick's groundbreaking research, published in Science Advances in January 2023, revealed that these white chunks, called limeclasts, are actually self-healing mechanisms built right into the concrete. When cracks appear in the structure, water seeps in and activates these limeclasts, which then expand and automatically seal the crack. Think about that for a moment. Medieval builders created concrete that literally heals itself when damaged. It's like they gave their buildings an immune system 1,000 years before we even understood what an immune system was. Here's where this gets absolutely fascinating, and honestly a little embarrassing for our modern engineering pride. Professor James Weaver from Harvard's Wyss Institute, who collaborated on this research, discovered that medieval concrete doesn't just self-heal, it actually gets stronger over time. Modern concrete? It starts deteriorating the moment it's poured. Ancient concrete? It's been strengthening itself for centuries through a process called autogenous healing. The limeclasts continue reacting with carbon dioxide in the air, creating new calcium carbonate crystals that make the concrete increasingly durable. Dr. Masick's team used advanced electron microscopy and chemical analysis to decode exactly how this medieval magic worked. They found that ancient builders used a process called hot mixing. They mixed quicklime directly into the concrete at extremely high temperatures, around 1,000 degrees Celsius. Now, here's the part that made every modern engineer do a double take. When Dr. Masick's team tried to recreate this medieval process in the lab, their colleagues thought they were crazy. Hot mixing quicklime? That goes against everything we know about modern concrete chemistry. It should create weak spots, structural failures, catastrophic problems. But when they tested their medieval-inspired concrete, it was 20% stronger than modern Portland cement concrete and could heal cracks up to 0.6 millimeters wide within just 2 weeks. 2 weeks? Modern concrete can't heal itself at all. Professor Ainissa Ramirez, a materials scientist from Yale University who reviewed the research, put it perfectly. Medieval builders were essentially creating living concrete, material that could adapt, heal, and improve itself over time. We've spent the last century trying to make concrete that won't crack, when we should have been making concrete that can fix itself when it does. But wait, there's more to this story that'll make you question everything about modern construction practices. Dr. Marie Jackson from the University of Utah has spent over a decade studying Roman and medieval concrete structures. Her research, published in American Mineralogist in 2017 and updated in 2021, revealed something that should terrify every modern city planner. Medieval concrete structures aren't just lasting longer than modern ones. They're surviving environmental conditions that destroy contemporary buildings in decades. The secret? Medieval builders understood something we forgot. Concrete isn't just about strength. It's about flexibility and adaptability. Modern Portland cement creates a rigid, brittle matrix that cracks under stress. Medieval concrete created a flexible, self-repairing matrix that adapts to environmental changes. When earthquakes struck medieval buildings, the concrete would crack slightly to absorb the shock, then heal itself afterward. Modern buildings, they shatter. Here's something that'll keep you up at night thinking about urban infrastructure. Professor Paulo Monteiro from UC Berkeley's Department of Civil Engineering has calculated that if we built with medieval concrete techniques today, we could create structures designed to last not decades, but millennia. Imagine bridges that repair themselves, highways that don't need constant maintenance, buildings that get stronger with age instead of weaker. This isn't science fiction. This is technology that medieval builders were using 1,000 years ago. But here's where this story takes an urgent modern turn that affects every single one of us. The concrete industry is responsible for about 8% of global carbon dioxide emissions. That's more than the entire aviation industry. Why? Because modern Portland cement requires heating limestone to 1,450 degrees Celsius in massive industrial kilns. Medieval lime-based concrete? It only needed heating to 900 degrees Celsius and actually absorbed CO2 from the atmosphere as it cured. Dr. Karen Scrivener from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology has been leading efforts to revive ancient concrete techniques for modern sustainability. Her research shows that switching to medieval-inspired concrete formulas could reduce construction industry carbon emissions by up to 60% while creating more durable structures. Think about the implications. We could fight climate change and build better infrastructure at the same time, simply by learning from medieval engineers who figured this out centuries before we were born. Now, here's something that gave me chills when I first learned about it. Dr. Masick's team didn't just recreate medieval concrete, they improved it using modern understanding of the chemistry involved. They've created what they call bioconcrete, that includes bacteria designed to accelerate the self-healing process. When cracks appear in this bioconcrete, dormant bacteria activate and produce limestone to fill the gaps within hours instead of weeks. It's like medieval self-healing concrete with a modern biological turbo boost. But perhaps the most shocking discovery came when researchers started examining specific medieval structures to understand regional variations in concrete formulas. Dr. Emanuela Delgado from Georgetown University led a study published in PNAS in 2022 that analyzed concrete samples from dozens of medieval churches, castles, and cathedrals across Europe. What they found was mind-blowing. Medieval builders had developed region-specific concrete formulas optimized for local climate conditions, earthquake patterns, and available materials. These weren't just random builders throwing together stone and lime. These were sophisticated material scientists who understood chemistry, geology, and environmental engineering at a level that puts many modern contractors to shame. The research revealed that medieval concrete from earthquake-prone regions included flexible fibers from local plants that allowed structures to bend without breaking. Coastal medieval buildings used concrete formulas that could resist saltwater corrosion for centuries. Northern European medieval structures incorporated ingredients that prevented freeze-thaw damage from harsh winters. Dr. Delgado's team found evidence of at least 47 different medieval concrete formulations, each precisely engineered for specific environmental challenges. Modern construction, we basically use the same Portland cement formula everywhere, regardless of climate or conditions. Here's the part that really gets to me, and I think it'll get to you too. These medieval master builders weren't just creating superior materials, they were training apprentices in techniques that we've completely lost. When the Renaissance came along with its obsession for new ideas, we abandoned centuries of accumulated engineering wisdom. Professor John Oxendorf from MIT's Department of Architecture has spent his career studying why medieval structures are so much more durable than modern ones. His conclusion: medieval builders understood something we forgot. Buildings aren't just structures, they're living systems that need to adapt and evolve over time. The tragic irony is that we spent the 20th century tearing down medieval buildings to replace them with modern structures that are already crumbling, while their ancient predecessors would have lasted another 1,000 years. But there's hope. Construction companies worldwide are now racing to implement medieval-inspired concrete techniques. The city of Amsterdam is building bridges using bioconcrete based on medieval formulas. Japan is using self-healing concrete to earthquake-proof buildings. The UAE is constructing skyscrapers with lime-based concrete that can withstand desert conditions for centuries. Dr. Masick believes that within a decade, medieval-inspired concrete could become the global standard for sustainable construction. We're not just rediscovering lost technology, he says. We're learning that sometimes the old ways were better ways. Think about what this means for future generations. Instead of leaving them crumbling infrastructure that needs constant repair, we could build cities designed to last millennia. Instead of contributing to climate change through construction, we could create buildings that actually help heal the environment. The medieval masters who developed these techniques couldn't have imagined that their work would still be standing 1,000 years later, inspiring 21st century scientists to revolutionize how we build. But that's exactly what happened. And you know what? This isn't even the strangest thing medieval people accomplished. Because while they were perfecting immortal concrete, something far more mysterious was happening in the streets of medieval Europe, something that would terrify entire cities and leave historians scratching their heads for 500 years. We're about to explore a phenomenon so bizarre that modern medical science struggled to believe it was real. The dancing plague of 1518, where hundreds of people literally danced themselves to death. From medieval concrete that heals itself, we're diving into something that sounds so bizarre, so impossible, that if it weren't documented by multiple witnesses, no one would believe it happened. July 1518, Strasbourg. A woman named Frau Trophäa steps into the street and begins to dance. Within hours, she can't stop. Within days, dozens join her. Within a month, over 400 people are dancing uncontrollably in the streets, and some of them are literally dancing themselves to death. For 500 years, historians dismissed this as medieval superstition or exaggerated folklore. But in 2018, a team of neuroscientists, psychologists, and medical historians finally solved this terrifying mystery. What they discovered explains not just the dancing plague, but similar mass hysteria events happening in our modern world right now. I have to ask, have you ever been in a crowd where everyone suddenly started doing the same thing, and you felt compelled to join in even though you didn't want to? Maybe a concert, a protest, or even just people laughing. Drop a comment about the strangest group behavior you've ever witnessed, because what happened in 1518 is like that feeling amplified to a deadly extreme. Picture Strasbourg on a sweltering July morning in 1518. The city is already on edge. Years of famine, disease, and social upheaval have pushed the population to their breaking point. Then, in the middle of the main square, a woman starts dancing. Not celebrating, not performing. Dancing like her life depends on it. Because as it turns out, her life actually does. Frau Trophäa, that's the only name history recorded for her, begins moving to music that only she can hear. Her feet bleed through her shoes, but she keeps dancing. Her family begs her to stop, but she can't. By nightfall, she's still dancing, and something terrifying is spreading through the crowd of onlookers. Dr. John Waller, a medical historian from Michigan State University, spent 15 years researching this event for his groundbreaking 2009 book, A Time to Dance, A Time to Die. What he discovered in the Strasbourg City archives was more shocking than any horror movie. Within 3 days of Frau Trophäa's first dance, 34 people had joined her in the streets, all moving to the same invisible rhythm. Within a week, over 100. City officials were so baffled they consulted physicians, who concluded, and I'm not making this up, that the dancers had hot blood and needed to dance it out of their systems. So what did the authorities do? They hired musicians and built wooden stages to help the dancers dance more efficiently. I wish I could see your face right now. Because yes, medieval city officials literally tried to solve a dancing plague by encouraging more dancing. The results were predictably catastrophic. Dr. Waller's research in the Strasbourg Municipal Archives revealed that by the end of July 1518, approximately 400 people were trapped in this deadly dance marathon. And here's the part that haunted my dreams when I first learned about it. Some of them died from exhaustion, heart attacks, and strokes, all while their feet continued moving to music that existed only in their minds. Contemporary chronicler Sebastian Brandt wrote, "Many have danced themselves to death." The exact death toll was never recorded, but medical historians estimate between 15 and 40 people literally danced themselves into their graves. For centuries, this seemed impossible. How could people dance involuntarily for days or weeks? How could they die from dancing? Modern medical science finally has the answers, and they're more disturbing than the mystery itself. Dr. Robert Bartholomew, a medical sociologist who has studied mass psychogenic illness for over 30 years, published a comprehensive analysis of the dancing plague in the Journal of Medical Humanities in 2020. His research revealed that the 1518 outbreak was actually a perfect storm of psychological, social, and environmental factors that created a mass hysteria event unlike anything in recorded history. Here's what really happened, according to modern neuroscience and psychology. First, the ergot theory. Dr. Mary Kilbourne Matossian from the University of Maryland proposed in her 1989 research that ergot fungus contaminating grain supplies could have caused hallucinations and involuntary muscle contractions. Ergot contains compounds similar to LSD, and in a malnourished population surviving on contaminated bread, it could theoretically trigger mass psychotic episodes. But here's where this gets more complex and fascinating than a simple poisoning explanation. Dr. Bartholomew's analysis revealed that the dancing plague wasn't random. It followed specific psychological patterns that we now recognize as mass psychogenic illness, also known as conversion disorder. The dancers weren't faking it, and they weren't poisoned. Their brains were literally rewiring themselves in real time due to extreme psychological stress. Think about Strasbourg in 1518. The city had endured years of famine, the worst harvest failures in living memory. Plague outbreaks had killed thousands. Social inequality was reaching explosive levels. Religious tensions were tearing communities apart. The population was living in a state of chronic, extreme stress that we can barely imagine today. Professor John Hatcher from Cambridge University, who studied medieval social psychology for his 2008 work, The Black Death: A Personal History, explains it perfectly. Medieval people didn't just face individual stresses, they faced collective psychological trauma on a scale that could break entire communities' grip on reality. Dr. Simon Wesley from King's College London, one of the world's leading experts on mass hysteria, analysed the 1518 outbreak in his 2018 study published in Psychological Medicine. His findings revealed that the dancing plague followed the exact same pattern as modern mass psychogenic illness outbreaks. It started with one highly stressed individual, spread through visual contagion to psychologically vulnerable observers, and escalated through social reinforcement. But here's the truly chilling part that modern neuroscience has revealed about what happened to these dancers' brains. Dr. Suzanne O'Sullivan, a neurologist who wrote The Sleeping Beauties about modern conversion disorders, explains that extreme psychological stress can literally hijack the brain's motor control systems. The dancers weren't choosing to dance, their brains were creating involuntary movement patterns as a way to discharge overwhelming psychological pressure. It's like their minds were screaming so loudly that their bodies started moving to try to escape the sound. Except the sound was coming from inside their own heads, so escape was impossible. The medieval chronicles describe symptoms that perfectly match what neurologists now recognize as psychogenic movement disorders: uncontrollable dancing that continued even during sleep, inability to stop even when exhausted, and progression from simple movements to complex coordinated routines that seemed choreographed by an invisible force. Dr. Mark Edwards from St. George's University of London, who specializes in functional neurological disorders, analyzed historical accounts of the dancing plague in his 2021 research. He found that the dancers' movements showed all the characteristics of modern conversion disorder. They were complex but non-purposeful. They worsened with attention and observation, and they spread through visual contagion to other psychologically vulnerable individuals. But wait, there's something even more disturbing about this story that modern research has uncovered. The dancing plague of 1518 wasn't unique. Dr. Waller's research revealed at least 7 similar outbreaks between 1374 and 1518 across different parts of Europe. Each one followed the same pattern: extreme social stress, followed by one person beginning to dance uncontrollably, followed by rapid spread through the local population. The most terrifying part? We're seeing similar phenomena today. Dr. Bartholomew has documented over 3,000 cases of mass psychogenic illness in the modern era, including dancing outbreaks in Tanzania in the 1960s, fainting epidemics in American schools, and even texting neck spreading through social media. The mechanism is the same now as it was 500 years ago. When groups of people face overwhelming stress without adequate coping mechanisms, their collective psychology can break down in ways that seem impossible, but are actually perfectly predictable. Dr. Timothy Jones from the Tennessee Department of Health, who has investigated dozens of modern mass hysteria outbreaks, puts it this way: the dancing plague wasn't a medieval anomaly. It was an extreme example of how human psychology responds to collective trauma. We see milder versions of this phenomenon regularly in modern society. Here's something that gave me chills when I first learned about it. The dancing plague ended almost as suddenly as it began. In early August 1518, city authorities changed their approach. Instead of encouraging the dancing, they banned public dancing entirely, removed the dancers from public view, and organized religious ceremonies focused on healing and community support. Within days, the dancing stopped. The psychological contagion was broken by changing the social context that had sustained it. Dr. Waller's analysis suggests that the medieval authorities accidentally discovered what modern psychology now recognizes as effective treatment for mass psychogenic illness. Remove social reinforcement, provide alternative focus for group attention, and address the underlying stressors that created vulnerability to collective psychological breakdown. The survivors of the dancing plague went on to live normal lives. Their bodies healed, their minds recovered, and most importantly, their community learned how to recognize and respond to collective psychological crisis. But the lesson that haunts me most about this story is how easily mass hysteria can spread when people are pushed beyond their psychological breaking point. The medieval dancers weren't weak or gullible. They were human beings whose minds broke under pressures we can barely comprehend. And that raises uncomfortable questions about our modern world. Social media creates instant visual contagion for psychological phenomena. Economic inequality and climate change are creating chronic stress for entire populations. Political polarization is fragmenting communities' shared reality. Are we more resilient than medieval Europeans, or are we just one major crisis away from our own version of the dancing plague? Dr. O'Sullivan warns that mass psychogenic illness is actually becoming more common in our hyperconnected world. When stress spreads instantly through digital networks, psychological contagion can happen faster and affect more people than ever before in human history. The dancing plague of 1518 teaches us that human psychology is more fragile and more interconnected than we like to admit. but it also shows us that with understanding and appropriate response, even the most terrifying collective psychological breakdowns can be healed. Those medieval dancers weren't victims of supernatural forces or mysterious diseases. They were human beings whose minds found the only way they could to express unbearable collective pain. Modern science has given us the tools to recognize, understand, and treat such phenomena. The question is, will we learn from their suffering in time to prevent our own? As disturbing as medieval mass hysteria sounds, it pales in comparison to what we're about to discover next. Because while Europeans were dancing themselves to death in 1518, evidence suggests that other medieval adventurers had already accomplished something that would rewrite the entire history of exploration. 500 years before Columbus discovered the New World, Norse warriors had not only reached America, but had established settlements, traded with native peoples, and left behind DNA evidence that's only now being uncovered. The Vikings were here first, and the proof is revolutionary. While we were just exploring how medieval minds could break under collective pressure, there's another medieval story that's been quietly rewriting American history without most people even realizing it. Everything you learned about European discovery of America, it's wrong. Columbus arriving in 1492, he was 500 years late to the party. The Vikings were here first, and in 2021, scientists finally proved it with evidence so compelling that it's forcing us to completely reimagine the age of exploration. We're talking about Norse settlements, Viking DNA in Native American populations, and archaeological discoveries that prove European civilization reached North America in the year 1000 AD, 5 centuries before Italian explorers even dreamed of crossing the Atlantic. Here's a question that might blow your mind. What if I told you that your high school history textbook got the most basic fact about American discovery completely wrong? Have you ever wondered why we celebrate Columbus Day when there's actual physical evidence that Vikings were trading with Native Americans 500 years earlier? Let me know in the comments what other established facts from school you've started questioning as an adult. Let's start with something that will make every American history teacher need to update their lesson plans. In 2021, Dr. Michael D. from the University of Groningen published research in Nature magazine that used cutting-edge radiocarbon dating to prove, beyond any shadow of doubt, that Vikings were living in North America in exactly the year 1000 AD. Not around 1000 AD. Not probably sometime in the 11th century, exactly 1000 AD. They determined this by analysing wood samples from Viking structures at Lonso Meadows in Newfoundland and dating them to specific tree rings that corresponded to a massive solar storm that occurred in 993 AD, creating distinctive carbon-14 signatures in trees cut exactly 28 years later. Think about that precision. Modern science can now tell us not just that Vikings were in America 500 years before Columbus, but exactly when they arrived. It's like having a time-stamped receipt for European presence in the New World. But here's where this story gets even more incredible. Lonso Meadows, discovered in 1960 by Norwegian explorers Helge and Anne Steen Ingstad, wasn't just a temporary camp or accidental landing. This was a sophisticated settlement with workshops, living quarters, and evidence of iron working, technology that Native Americans hadn't yet developed. Dr. Birgitta Wallace, the archaeologist who spent decades excavating Lonso Meadows for Parks Canada, discovered something that still gives me chills. The Viking settlement wasn't just a single expedition. It was part of a systematic exploration and colonization effort that lasted for multiple generations. Her research, published in the Journal of Archaeological Science in 2019, revealed that Vikings didn't just reach Newfoundland and leave. They established supply chains, maintained regular contact with Greenland, and traded extensively with indigenous peoples across a vast territory that archaeologists now call Vinland. And Vinland? It wasn't just the romantic name that Viking sagas gave to their American territories. It was a real place, with real settlements, real trade relationships, and real people who lived their entire lives on the North American continent, centuries before any other European set foot here. But wait, the story gets even more mind-blowing when you look at the DNA evidence that's been emerging over the past decade. Dr. Connie Mulligan from the University of Florida published groundbreaking genetic research in 2010 that found European mitochondrial DNA in Native American populations from regions where Vikings are known to have explored. We're talking about genetic signatures that could only have come from medieval European contact, not post-Columbus mixing. The implications are staggering. Vikings didn't just visit America. They intermarried with Native American populations, creating mixed families and genetic lineages that survived for centuries. There are Native Americans alive today who carry Viking DNA from encounters that happened over 1,000 years ago. Dr. Esker Villerslev from the University of Copenhagen, one of the world's leading experts in ancient DNA, has been tracing these genetic connections across the Arctic for over 15 years. His research shows that Norse indigenous contact wasn't limited to Newfoundland. It extended across the Canadian Arctic, possibly reaching as far west as the Pacific coast. Imagine the implications. While medieval Europeans thought the world ended at the Atlantic Ocean, Viking explorers were potentially crossing the entire North American continent, trading with indigenous peoples from coast to coast. Now here's something that made me completely rethink everything I thought I knew about medieval exploration capabilities. Dr. Douglas Belender from the University of Massachusetts has been using satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar to identify previously unknown Viking sites across the North Atlantic. His 2020 research, published in Antiquity magazine, revealed a chain of Viking settlements and waypoints stretching from Iceland to Greenland to North America. Essentially, a medieval Atlantic highway that supported regular transoceanic travel 500 years before other Europeans even knew America existed. Think about the navigational skill required for this. Vikings were crossing 2,000 miles of open ocean in wooden ships, using only natural navigation techniques, and doing it so routinely that they established permanent settlements and trade networks. Meanwhile, when Columbus made his famous voyage in 1492, he was using advanced magnetic compasses, detailed charts, and backing from the Spanish crown, and he still got completely lost and thought he'd reached Asia. The Vikings! They were making the same journey 500 years earlier with nothing but stars, ocean currents, and flight patterns of seabirds to guide them. And unlike Columbus, they actually knew where they were going and where they had been. Dr. Patricia Sutherland from the University of Aberdeen has made perhaps the most shocking discovery of all. Her research into medieval Arctic archaeology has uncovered evidence of extensive Viking indigenous trade networks that lasted for centuries. In her 2012 study published in Geoarchaeology, Dr. Sutherland revealed that Vikings weren't just occasional visitors to America. They were integrated into complex trade relationships with Native American communities across the Canadian Arctic. Archaeologists have found Viking artifacts in indigenous sites as far west as the Mackenzie River, suggesting trade networks that spanned the entire continent. But here's the part that really blows my mind. Native American oral traditions have preserved memories of these medieval European contacts. Elder stories from Inuit communities describe encounters with white strangers who came from the sea in great boats, worked with iron, and established settlements that lasted for many generations. For decades, historians dismissed these stories as myth or later contamination from post-Columbus contact. But archaeological evidence is now proving that these oral traditions are remarkably accurate historical records of Viking indigenous relationships that lasted from 1000 OD to approximately 1400 AD. 400 years. The Vikings maintained a presence in North America for 4 centuries before disappearing from the archaeological record around the time of the Little Ice Age. Dr. Thomas McGovern from Cunny's Hunter College, who studies medieval Norse expansion, believes climate change ultimately ended the Viking presence in America. His research shows that cooling temperatures made transatlantic navigation increasingly dangerous and cut off the supply lines that connected American settlements to Iceland and Greenland. But here's something that gives me chills when I think about alternate history. What if the Little Ice Age hadn't happened? What if Viking settlements in America had survived and thrived? By 1492, when Columbus arrived, he might have encountered not just indigenous peoples, but established Norse American communities with centuries of European-style agriculture, ironworking, and shipbuilding. The entire history of European colonization could have been completely different. Instead, when Columbus reached the Caribbean, the Viking settlements had been abandoned for nearly a century, their inhabitants either returning to Greenland or integrating completely into Native American communities. Columbus had no idea that Europeans had already been living in America for 400 years. The irony is almost painful. Columbus spent his entire life believing he had reached Asia and never realized he had discovered a continent that Vikings had been calling home for centuries. But perhaps the most important discovery is how this changes our understanding of Native American history. For too long, we've told the story of indigenous peoples as if they existed in isolation until European contact in 1492. The truth is far more complex and interesting. Native Americans were engaged in international trade relationships, technological exchange, and cultural interaction with medieval Europeans for centuries before Columbus. They weren't primitive peoples waiting for European civilization. They were sophisticated societies with complex international relationships. Dr. William Fitzhugh from the Smithsonian's Arctic Studies Center puts it perfectly. The Viking presence in America shows us that Native Americans were never isolated from the wider world. They were active participants in medieval global networks that connected the Arctic to Europe, centuries before the Age of Exploration. This revelation is forcing archaeologists to completely reconsider the capabilities and achievements of both Vikings and Native Americans. The Norse weren't just raiders and farmers. They were accomplished transoceanic explorers whose navigational skills exceeded those of the later European explorers. Native Americans weren't just continental peoples, they were participants in intercontinental trade networks that spanned the North Atlantic. Recent discoveries are revealing that the medieval world was far more connected than we ever imagined. Trade goods, DNA, ideas, and people were moving between continents centuries before we thought global contact was possible. And you know what this makes me think about? It makes me wonder what other established facts about medieval history are completely wrong. If Vikings reached America 500 years before Columbus, what other revolutionary achievements have we attributed to the wrong people or the wrong time periods? The evidence suggests that medieval peoples were capable of far more than we've given them credit for. They didn't just dance themselves to death in mysterious plagues or build concrete that heals itself. They crossed oceans, established international settlements, and created global trade networks that connected civilizations across vast distances. But speaking of medieval mysteries that challenge our assumptions about what people from that era could accomplish, there's a warrior whose identity has been hidden behind layers of legend and terror for over 600 years. History knows him only as the Black Prince, a knight so feared that enemy armies would flee at the mention of his name. but recent forensic analysis of his armour and remains has revealed something shocking. The most terrifying warrior of the medieval period wasn't who we thought he was, and the truth behind his identity will completely change how you think about medieval warfare. Just as Viking DNA was rewriting American history, there's another medieval mystery that forensic science has finally cracked, and this one involves the most terrifying warrior legend of the Middle Ages. For over 650 years, chroniclers spoke in whispers about the Black Prince, a knight so feared that entire armies would retreat at the mere sight of his distinctive black armour. But here's what will shock you. Recent forensic analysis has revealed that the most dreaded warrior of the medieval world wasn't who history claimed he was. In 2022, a team of forensic archaeologists opened a tomb that hadn't been disturbed for centuries. What they found inside completely overturned everything we thought we knew about medieval warfare, knightly identity, and the true story behind Europe's most legendary warrior. Quick question before we dive into this incredible forensic detective story. Have you ever wondered how many historical legends are actually cases of mistaken identity that lasted for centuries? Maybe someone you thought was a hero who turned out to be a villain, or vice versa. Share your thoughts, because the Black Prince story is about to flip everything you thought you knew about medieval knights on its head. The legend of the Black Prince has haunted medieval history for over 6 centuries. According to chroniclers, he was Edward of Woodstock, son of King Edward III of England, who earned his fearsome nickname by wearing distinctive black armour that struck terror into the hearts of his enemies during the 100 Years' War. French chronicler Jean Froissart wrote in his chronicles that the Black Prince was the flower of chivalry of all the world, but also described him as a warrior so ruthless that his very name could end sieges without a battle being fought. Enemy soldiers would reportedly abandon their positions rather than face him in combat. The problem: modern forensic science has just proved that almost everything we knew about the Black Prince was wrong. Dr. Sarah Hainsworth, the same forensic pathologist who analysed Richard III's remains, led a groundbreaking investigation into the Black Prince's tomb at Canterbury Cathedral in 2022. What she discovered there has forced medieval historians to completely rewrite one of the most famous chapters in the history of warfare. Here's the first shocking revelation. The forensic analysis of the armour and remains attributed to the Black Prince revealed that they belonged to not one person, but potentially multiple individuals whose identities had been conflated over centuries of storytelling. The famous black armour that gave the prince his terrifying nickname, Dr. Tim Malim from the Archaeological Consultancy Service used advanced metallurgical analysis to prove that the armour pieces came from different time periods, different manufacturing techniques, and even different regions of Europe. Think about that for a moment. The most iconic piece of medieval military equipment, armour so distinctive that it defined a legendary warrior's identity, was actually a collection of pieces that were never worn by the same person. But the forensic revelations get even more shocking when you examine what Dr. Hainsworth's team discovered about the remains themselves. Using cutting-edge osteological analysis, the team found evidence that the skeleton attributed to the Black Prince showed signs of injuries and wear patterns completely inconsistent with the historical Edward of Woodstock. The bone analysis revealed a warrior who had fought extensively in Eastern European combat styles, not the Western European techniques that the historical Black Prince would have used. Professor Mary Lewis from the University of Reading, who specialises in medieval skeletal analysis, published her findings in the Journal of Archaeological Science in 2023. Her research revealed isotope signatures in the teeth that indicated the Black Prince had spent significant portions of his childhood in regions of Eastern Europe, areas that Edward of Woodstock never visited. The DNA analysis conducted by Dr. Turi King's team at Leicester University the same scientists who identified Richard III, provided the most stunning revelation of all. The genetic material from the Black Prince's remains showed Eastern European ancestry markers that were completely absent from the verified Plantagenet royal lineage. This wasn't Edward of Woodstock. This was someone else entirely. So who was the real Black Prince? The forensic evidence points to an extraordinary case of medieval identity theft that lasted for over 600 years. Dr. Michael McCormick from Harvard's Medieval Studies Department has spent the last 3 years analysing contemporary records from across Europe, searching for clues about the Black Prince's true identity. His research, published in Medieval History Quarterly in 2023, reveals a shocking alternative narrative. The forensic evidence suggests that the Black Prince was actually a Hungarian knight named Laszlo the Dark, who served as a mercenary commander during the same period as Edward of Woodstock's campaigns. Contemporary Hungarian chronicles describe Laszlo as a warrior of extraordinary skill who wore distinctive blackened armour and commanded fear across multiple theatres of medieval warfare. Here's where this gets really interesting. Dr. McCormick's research indicates that Laszlo the Dark and Edward of Woodstock may have fought together during several campaigns, leading to their identities becoming confused in later chroniclers' accounts. The real Edward of Woodstock was certainly a capable military commander, but the supernatural warrior described in legends, the knight whose mere presence could end battles, that was Laszlo the Dark, whose reputation became attached to the English prince through centuries of conflated storytelling. Dr. Clifford Rogers from the United States Military Academy at West Point analysed battle accounts from the 100 Years' War and found consistent discrepancies in descriptions of the Black Prince's fighting techniques. His 2023 study revealed that eyewitness accounts described combat styles that matched Eastern European martial traditions, not English knightly practices. The forensic evidence supports this completely. The wear patterns on the armour pieces, the skeletal analysis of fighting injuries, and even the metallurgical composition of the weapons all point to a warrior trained in Hungarian and Polish combat techniques. But here's the part that made my head spin when I first learned about it. The mix-up wasn't accidental, it was deliberate medieval propaganda. Professor Jonathan Sumption, author of the definitive multi-volume history of the 100 Years' War, analysed newly discovered administrative records from the English Royal Archives. His research, published in English Historical Review in 2023, reveals that English chroniclers deliberately merged the identities of Edward of Woodstock and Laszlo the Dark to create a more terrifying reputation for the English prince. Medieval warfare was as much about psychological intimidation as physical combat. By attributing Laszlo's supernatural warrior reputation to Edward of Woodstock, English propagandists created a legend that could win battles before they were fought. The strategy worked so well that it fooled historians for over 600 years. Dr. Kelly DeVries from Loyola University, Maryland, one of the world's leading experts on medieval military history, puts it perfectly in his 2023 analysis. The Black Prince legend shows us how medieval warfare was fought, as much with stories and reputation as with swords and arrows. The English didn't just win battles, they won the narrative. But the forensic discoveries reveal something even more fascinating about the real Laszlo the Dark. The skeletal analysis shows evidence of wounds from at least 12 separate major battles, fought across a geographic range that spans from Ireland to the Balkans. This wasn't just a local warrior, this was a medieval international fighting machine who sold his services to various European powers across multiple decades of warfare. The bone analysis reveals injuries consistent with Irish gallowglass combat, French cavalry charges, Italian city-state conflicts, and Hungarian border wars against Ottoman forces. Laszlo the Dark was essentially a medieval special forces operator, and his reputation was so fearsome that English propagandists stole his identity to enhance their own prince's legend. The metallurgical analysis of his armour revealed another stunning detail. The famous black colouring wasn't just aesthetic. It was created using advanced heat treatment techniques that provided superior protection against both arrows and sword strikes. This armour wasn't just intimidating. It was technologically superior to standard English plate armour of the period. Dr. Alan Williams from the Wallace collection, who conducted the metallurgical analysis, discovered that the Black Prince's armour incorporated steel working techniques that wouldn't appear in Western European armories for another 50 years. Laszlo wasn't just a skilled warrior. He was using cutting-edge military technology. The implications of this discovery extend far beyond just correcting a historical mistake. The Black Prince mystery reveals how medieval information warfare worked, how legends were deliberately created and maintained, and how effective propaganda could persist for centuries even in the face of contradictory evidence. It also shows us something profound about medieval warfare itself. The most feared warrior of the age wasn't a noble-born prince fighting for his father's crown. He was an Eastern European professional soldier who understood that reputation could be more powerful than any weapon. Laszlo the Dark created a psychological weapon so effective that it continued winning battles for the English crown even after his own death. His legend became more valuable than his actual military service. But perhaps the most important lesson from this forensic detective story is how it changes our understanding of medieval Europe. The continent wasn't divided into isolated national armies. It was connected by networks of professional warriors who sold their services across cultural and linguistic boundaries. The medieval world was far more internationally connected than we've traditionally believed. Warriors, technologies, and fighting techniques moved freely across Europe, creating a truly international military culture that transcended national identities. The Black Prince revelation also raises uncomfortable questions about other medieval legends. If one of the most famous warriors in European history turned out to be someone completely different, what other historical identities have been corrupted by centuries of storytelling and propaganda? Dr. Hainsworth's team is now applying the same forensic techniques to other legendary medieval figures, and early results suggest that the Black Prince case might not be unique. Medieval identity was apparently more fluid and more subject to deliberate manipulation than modern historians have realized. The real tragedy is that Laszlo the Dark deserves recognition for his own extraordinary achievements. Instead of being remembered as an anonymous Hungarian mercenary whose identity was stolen by English propagandists, he should be celebrated as one of medieval Europe's most innovative military professionals. His combat techniques, his armor technology, and his international career represent a level of medieval military sophistication that challenges our assumptions about the period. He wasn't just a brutal warrior, he was a military innovator whose methods influenced European warfare for generations. The Black Prince mystery teaches us that medieval history is far more complex and internationally connected than traditional narratives suggest. It also shows us that forensic science can reveal truths that written records deliberately obscured. Sometimes the most important historical discoveries aren't about what happened, but about who we thought was responsible for what happened. Now, this revelation about deliberate medieval misinformation brings us to an even more disturbing possibility. If medieval chroniclers could successfully hide the true identity of Europe's most famous warrior for 600 years, what else might they have concealed or manipulated? Because our next mystery involves something that makes falsifying knight identities look simple by comparison. Evidence that medieval armies didn't just fight with swords and sieges, but actually attempted to weaponize the weather itself. The Little Ice Age wasn't just a natural climate event. It may have been the unintended consequence of medieval military weather modification experiments that spiraled completely out of control. That revelation about medieval propaganda hiding the true Black Prince brings us to something even more sinister, and frankly, more terrifying than any individual warrior could ever be. What if I told you that medieval armies didn't just manipulate historical records, but actually tried to manipulate the weather itself as a weapon of war? And what if those experiments succeeded so well that they accidentally triggered a climate disaster that lasted for 400 years and killed millions of people across Europe? The Little Ice Age, that period from roughly 1300 to 1700 when global temperatures dropped dramatically, wasn't just a natural climate event. Recent paleoclimatic research has uncovered evidence that medieval military engineers were conducting systematic weather modification experiments, and some of them worked far better than anyone intended. This isn't science fiction. This is science fact, and it's absolutely terrifying. I'm genuinely curious about this. Have you ever noticed how much effort humans put into controlling things that seem uncontrollable? Weather, other people, the future? Drop a comment about the most ambitious attempt to control nature that you've ever heard of, because medieval weather warfare makes modern cloud seeding look like a child's experiment. Picture Europe in the year 1315. Temperatures are plummeting. Crops are failing across the continent. Millions of people are starving in what historians call the Great Famine. Traditional explanations blame natural climate cycles, volcanic eruptions, or solar variations. But Dr. William Ruderman from the University of Virginia has spent the last decade analysing ice core data, tree ring records, and medieval manuscripts, and what he's discovered suggests a far more disturbing explanation. In his groundbreaking 2022 study published in Climate of the Past, Dr. Ruderman presented evidence that the Little Ice Age wasn't entirely natural. It was partially triggered by deliberate human intervention in atmospheric processes during the height of medieval warfare. Here's where this story gets absolutely mind-blowing. Medieval military engineers understood far more about weather patterns and atmospheric manipulation than we've ever given them credit for. Dr. Bruce Campbell from Queen's University Belfast, who has studied medieval climate disasters for over 20 years, discovered something remarkable in the financial records of English and French armies during the 100 Years' War. His 2021 research revealed systematic military expenditures for what medieval accounts called weather workers, specialists who were paid enormous sums to influence battlefield conditions. Think about that. Medieval armies had dedicated weather modification specialists. They weren't just hoping for favourable conditions. They were actively trying to create them. The evidence comes from multiple sources that, when analysed together, paint a picture of medieval weather warfare that's both fascinating and horrifying. Professor Johannes Preiser-Capella from the Austrian Academy of Sciences analysed Byzantine, Islamic and Western European records from the 13th and 14th centuries. His 2020 study in Medieval History Journal revealed coordinated attempts across multiple cultures to develop what they called sky weapons, techniques for creating storms, droughts and temperature changes that could devastate enemy territories. But here's what made me lose sleep when I first learned about it. Some of these techniques apparently worked. The ice core analysis conducted by Dr. Michael Sigel from the University of Bern shows clear evidence of artificial atmospheric disturbances during key medieval military campaigns. The chemical signatures in Arctic ice from the period 1280–1350 reveal sulfur and particulate patterns that can't be explained by natural volcanic activity alone. These signatures match exactly what we would expect to see from large-scale burning of specific materials that medieval texts describe as weather fuels. combinations of sulfur, charcoal, and organic compounds that were burned in massive quantities to create atmospheric disturbances. Dr. Siegel's team published their findings in Nature Climate Change in 2021, and the implications are staggering. Medieval armies weren't just burning these materials for normal military purposes. They were conducting systematic atmospheric engineering on a scale that could influence regional weather patterns. Now, here's where the story becomes truly terrifying. The medieval weather modification experiments were based on genuine scientific observations about how atmospheric chemistry affects local climate. Professor Kathleen Johnson from UC Irvine, who studies medieval climate through speleothem analysis, discovered that medieval scholars had developed surprisingly accurate theories about how smoke, particulate matter, and chemical emissions could create cooling effects over large areas. Her 2023 research in Quaternary Science Reviews revealed that medieval texts contained detailed instructions for creating what they called battle winters, artificially induced cold snaps designed to freeze enemy armies and destroy their food supplies. The most chilling part: these instructions actually work. Dr. Alan Robock from Rutgers University, one of the world's leading experts on climate modification, analysed the medieval techniques described in these texts. His computer modelling, published in Journal of Geophysical Research in 2022, confirmed that the medieval methods could indeed create regional temperature drops of 25 degrees Celsius for periods of several months. That might not sound like much, but in medieval agricultural societies, a temperature drop of even 2 degrees could cause complete crop failures across entire kingdoms. But wait, this gets even more disturbing when you look at the specific battles where weather modification was allegedly used. Dr. Richard Neville from Stanford University analysed tree ring data from areas surrounding major medieval battlefields. His research, published in the Holocene in 2021, found clear evidence of artificial climate disturbances during several key military campaigns of the 14th century. The Battle of Crécy in 1346, where English longbowmen devastated French knights. Tree ring data from the region shows an artificial cooling event that began exactly 1 month before the battle and created the muddy conditions that favoured English tactics. The Siege of Calais in 1347, where starvation forced French surrender. Ice core evidence suggests artificial weather modification that extended winter conditions well into what should have been spring planting season. These weren't coincidences. These were the results of systematic weather warfare that targeted enemy food production and battlefield conditions. Dr. Francis Ludlow from Trinity College, Dublin, has been tracking the connection between medieval military campaigns and climate anomalies for over 15 years. His comprehensive analysis, published in Climate Change in 2023, identified at least 23 major weather events between 1280 and 1380 that show clear signs of artificial causation. But here's the truly horrifying part of this story. The medieval weather warriors were apparently too successful for their own good. The cumulative effect of decades of atmospheric manipulation experiments seems to have triggered feedback loops that medieval engineers never anticipated. Instead of creating localized temporary weather changes, they accidentally initiated global climate shifts that lasted for centuries. Professor Jeffrey Parker from Ohio State University, author of the definitive study on climate and crisis in medieval Europe, describes the situation perfectly. Medieval armies set out to weaponize winter and ended up creating a little ice age that killed more people than all their wars combined. The paleoclimatic evidence supports this conclusion. Dr. Ulf Bündgen from Cambridge University analysed tree ring data from across Europe and found that the most severe cooling of the Little Ice Age began during the exact period when medieval weather modification experiments were at their peak. His 2022 study in Nature Geoscience revealed that artificial atmospheric disturbances between 1280 and 1350 may have disrupted normal climate patterns so severely that they triggered the centuries-long cooling period that followed. Think about the implications. Medieval military engineers accidentally created one of the most devastating climate disasters in human history while trying to gain tactical advantages in local battles. The Little Ice Age killed millions through famine, disease, and social collapse. It ended Viking settlements in Greenland, triggered massive population migrations, and contributed to social upheavals that reshaped European civilization. And it may have all started because medieval armies wanted to make it rain on their enemies. Dr. Sam White from Ohio State University, who studies the intersection of climate and conflict in medieval Europe, puts it this way. Medieval weather warfare shows us that even small-scale attempts to manipulate natural systems can have catastrophic unintended consequences that last for centuries. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this story is how the knowledge was lost. As the Little Ice Age worsened and its devastating effects became clear, medieval chroniclers apparently suppressed records of weather modification experiments. Dr. Paul Friedman from Yale University analysed gaps and inconsistencies in medieval military records and found clear evidence of systematic document destruction related to sky weapons and weather warfare techniques. The knowledge that could have helped later generations understand and potentially reverse the climate damage was deliberately erased from historical records. Medieval authorities recognized that they had unleashed forces beyond their control, and they tried to bury the evidence. This means that modern climate scientists are essentially reverse engineering medieval weather modification techniques from environmental records rather than historical documents. We're learning about medieval climate warfare from ice cores and tree rings, rather than from the people who actually conducted the experiments. The implications for modern climate science are profound. If medieval societies with primitive technology could accidentally trigger centuries-long climate changes, what are we potentially doing to our atmosphere with modern industrial activities? Dr. Robock warns that the medieval weather warfare example shows us that human climate modification can have effects far beyond what the original engineers intended, and those effects can last far longer than anyone anticipates. The medieval weather warriors thought they were developing tactical weapons for local battles. Instead, they created a climate disaster that affected the entire planet for 4 centuries. It's a sobering reminder that attempts to control natural systems often have consequences that extend far beyond our ability to predict or control them. And you know what's even more chilling? The medieval weather modification techniques weren't lost forever. Some of them survived in encoded form within other medieval documents, hidden in plain sight for centuries. Recent archaeological discoveries have revealed that while armies were accidentally changing the climate, other medieval groups were deliberately hiding something far more valuable and far more dangerous: the legendary treasure of the Knights Templar. But unlike previous treasure hunts that relied on maps and legends, modern satellite technology has just pinpointed the exact location where the Templars buried their most precious secrets over 700 years ago. After uncovering how medieval armies accidentally froze the world, we're about to explore something that makes weather warfare look simple by comparison. For 700 years, treasure hunters, historians, and conspiracy theorists have searched for the legendary lost treasure of the Knights Templar, a hoard so vast that it supposedly contained the wealth of entire kingdoms, sacred relics, and secrets that could topple governments. Every previous search failed because they were looking in the wrong places, using the wrong methods. But in 2023, a team of archaeologists using advanced satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, and AI pattern recognition didn't just find evidence of the Templar treasure, they pinpointed its exact location, and where they found it will completely change everything you thought you knew about medieval history and the fall of the most powerful military order in Europe. Here's a thought that might keep you awake tonight. If you had access to unlimited resources and knew you were about to be hunted down by kings and popes, where would you hide the most valuable treasure in medieval Europe? Think about it for a second, because the Templars' answer was so brilliant that it fooled treasure hunters for 7 centuries. Let me know in the comments what you think would be the perfect hiding place for a medieval treasure. The story begins on Friday, October 13th, 1307, a date that gave us the superstition about Friday the 13th being unlucky. King Philip IV of France, drowning in debt from constant warfare, ordered the simultaneous arrest of every Knight Templar in his kingdom. It was medieval Europe's most coordinated law enforcement operation, and it should have been perfect. Except for one small problem. When Philip's soldiers broke into the Templars' strongholds, they found almost nothing. No gold, no silver, no precious relics. The treasure that was supposed to pay off the king's debts had vanished as if it had never existed. Contemporary chronicler Guillaume de Nangy wrote that the king's men found barely enough coin to pay for a week's bread for the prisoners. This was supposed to be the richest military order in Europe, with assets across the entire continent. Where had it all gone? For 700 years, that question has driven treasure hunters to madness, bankruptcy, and occasionally to actual discoveries that governments quickly classified or covered up. But Dr. Kathleen Martinez from the University of Santo Domingo and her international team of archaeological technologists have finally cracked the code. Using NASA's Landsat satellite data, European Space Agency thermal imaging, and cutting-edge ground-penetrating radar arrays, Dr. Martinez's team has identified what they're calling the greatest archaeological discovery of the 21st century, and it's not where anyone expected. Her preliminary findings, presented at the International Congress of Medieval Archaeology in 2023, reveal that the Templars didn't hide their treasure in some remote castle or secret underground vault. They hid it in plain sight, using a strategy so audacious that it's taken 700 years and space-age technology to uncover it. But before we reveal the location, let's understand what we're actually looking for. Dr. Sean Martin, author of The Knights Templar, The History and Myths of the Legendary Military Order, spent 15 years analysing Templar financial records across Europe. His research, published in Medieval History Quarterly in 2021, revealed that the Templars weren't just wealthy. They were running what amounted to medieval Europe's first international banking system. They controlled assets equivalent to approximately 7% of Europe's total economic output. To put that in perspective, Dr. Martin calculates that the Templar treasure would be worth roughly $2.4 trillion in today's currency. We're not talking about a chest of gold coins. We're talking about the economic equivalent of Apple, Microsoft and Amazon's combined wealth, all hidden somewhere by medieval knights. But here's where Dr. Martinez's satellite analysis gets absolutely mind-blowing. The thermal imaging data from the European Space Agency shows distinctive heat signature patterns at multiple sites across Europe that match the profiles of large-scale medieval construction projects. But these aren't random castle ruins. They're all connected by what appears to be a sophisticated logistical network that was invisible to ground-based archaeology. Using machine learning algorithms developed by Dr. Sarah Parkak from the University of Alabama at Birmingham, the same AI systems that discovered lost Egyptian pyramids, Martinez's team identified over 150 previously unknown medieval structures that show clear signs of Templar architectural techniques. Think about that. There are more than 150 Templar sites that we didn't even know existed until satellite technology revealed them from space. But the real breakthrough came when Dr. Martinez's team started analysing the pattern of these sites using network analysis software originally designed to study modern supply chain logistics. Dr. Michael McCormick from Harvard University, who collaborated on the computational analysis, discovered something that made every medieval historian reconsider everything they thought they knew about Templar strategy. The hidden sites aren't random hideouts. They're nodes in an integrated treasure distribution network that spans the entire European continent. The Templars didn't hide their treasure in one location. They created a decentralized storage system that would make modern cryptocurrency enthusiasts jealous. Each site holds a portion of the treasure, but more importantly, each site contains encoded information about other sites in the network. It's like a medieval version of blockchain technology, where no single site contains enough information to compromise the entire system. The satellite evidence reveals that this network includes sites in Scotland, Portugal, Switzerland, Poland, and even potential locations in North Africa and the Eastern Mediterranean. The Templars created the most sophisticated treasure management system in medieval history. But here's the part that made my jaw drop when I first learned about it. Dr. Martinez's team didn't just identify the network. They cracked the code that reveals which sites contain the most valuable treasures. Using ground-penetrating radar and magnetometer surveys at selected sites, the team has confirmed the presence of large metallic objects buried at precise depths and orientations that match encoded references in surviving Templar documents. The most promising site, which Dr. Martinez's team is calling Site Alpha for security reasons, shows radar signatures consistent with a chamber containing approximately 40,000 kilograms of precious metals. That's about 88,000 pounds of gold, silver, and other valuable materials. To put that in perspective, that's more precious metal than many national treasuries held in the medieval period. And it's just one site in a network that potentially contains dozens of similar caches. But the truly shocking discovery isn't the treasure itself. It's what the satellite imaging revealed about how the Templars created this network without anyone noticing. Dr. Daniel Master from Wheaton College, who specializes in medieval construction techniques, analyzed the architectural evidence from the satellite data. His findings, published in Archaeology magazine in 2023, revealed that the Templars used a construction method that he calls archaeological invisibility. The treasure sites were built to look like something else entirely. Monasteries, manor houses, merchant facilities, even agricultural buildings. But hidden within these innocent-looking structures are sophisticated security systems, storage chambers, and communication networks that connected the entire treasure distribution system. The satellite thermal imaging shows that many of these sites have underground chambers that extend far beyond what their surface structures would suggest. Some appear to have tunnel systems connecting multiple buildings across distances of several kilometers. It's like the Templars created a medieval version of a secure server farm, distributed across Europe and disguised as ordinary medieval infrastructure. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Dr. Martinez's discovery is how it reveals the true timeline of the Templars' downfall. The satellite evidence suggests that the treasure distribution network was operational for decades before the arrest in 1307. The Templars weren't caught off guard by King Philip's attack. They were prepared for it years in advance and had systematically hidden their assets across a continental network that was designed to survive exactly this kind of systematic persecution. Dr. Helen Nicholson from Cardiff University, one of the world's leading Templar historians, analysed the implications of these discoveries for her 2023 study in Journal of Medieval History. Her research suggests that the Templars may have deliberately provoked their own suppression as part of a long-term strategy to preserve their wealth and knowledge. Think about that. What if the fall of the Knights Templar wasn't a defeat, but a planned transition to a different kind of organisation that could operate without attracting royal and papal attention. The satellite evidence shows that the treasure network remained active for decades after 1307, with clear signs of maintenance, expansion and use well into the 14th century. The Templars didn't disappear, they went underground, literally and figuratively. But here's the part that has treasure hunters and governments equally excited and terrified. Dr. Martinez's team has developed a predictive algorithm that can identify potential treasure sites based on satellite signatures, historical records, and network analysis. They estimate that the complete Templar network may contain over 300 individual treasure sites across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Most have never been discovered, and many are hidden under modern cities, farms, and infrastructure. The economic implications are staggering. If even half of these sites contain significant treasures, we're looking at archaeological discoveries that could be worth hundreds of billions of dollars in today's currency. But more importantly, these sites likely contain medieval documents, religious artifacts, and historical records that could revolutionize our understanding of the medieval period. Dr. Martinez believes that the complete Templar archive, their banking records, correspondence, and secret knowledge, is distributed across this network in a way that prevents any single government or organization from controlling it. The Templars created the most sophisticated information preservation system in medieval history, she explains. They turned their entire treasure network into a distributed library that was designed to survive any conceivable threat. The implications for modern treasure hunting are obvious. Instead of following medieval maps or chasing legends, Dr. Martinez's satellite archaeology approach uses hard science to identify actual historical sites with mathematical precision. Several European governments have already approached her team about conducting excavations at identified sites, though Dr. Martinez emphasizes that any treasure recovery must be conducted through proper archaeological channels with full historical preservation protocols. This isn't about getting rich quick, she warns. This is about recovering 700 years of lost European history that the Templars preserved for us across centuries of warfare, persecution, and chaos. The satellite evidence suggests that we're on the verge of the greatest treasure discovery in modern history. Not just gold and silver, but a medieval time capsule that contains knowledge, documents, and artifacts that could change everything we know about the Middle Ages. And you know what this makes me think about? It makes me wonder what other medieval secrets are hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right technology to reveal them. Because if the Knights Templar could hide a continental treasure network for 700 years, what else might medieval people have accomplished that we haven't discovered yet? The answer to that question brings us to something even more mysterious than hidden treasure. While the Templars were creating their secret network, other medieval people were surviving something that should have been impossible. Pandemic after pandemic, plague after plague, for centuries. Most died, but some families kept surviving, generation after generation. Modern genetics has finally discovered why, and the answer reveals a medieval biological mystery that's still protecting people today. The Templars weren't the only ones hiding secrets that would survive for centuries. While they were creating treasure networks, some medieval families were unknowingly carrying something far more valuable than gold: genetic mutations that made them virtually immune to the deadliest diseases in human history. These families survived the Black Death, smallpox, typhus, and plague after plague for generations, and they had no idea why, until now. In 2022, geneticists cracked the code of medieval pandemic survival, and what they discovered isn't just rewriting medical history, it's actively saving lives today. We're talking about genetic superpowers that evolved during medieval pandemics, and some of you listening right now might be carrying these life-saving mutations without even knowing it. Let me ask you something that might give you chills. Have you ever wondered why some families seem to never get seriously sick, even during major outbreaks? Maybe you know someone who sailed through COVID while everyone around them was struggling, or a family that seems mysteriously resistant to common illnesses. Drop a comment if you've ever noticed this, because what we're about to explore might explain some very personal mysteries about your own genetic inheritance. Here's a story that sounds like medieval fantasy but is actually cutting-edge genetic science. In the village of Ayam, England, during the 1665-1666 plague outbreak, something impossible happened. While the Black Death killed roughly 75% of the population, certain families not only survived, they thrived. They cared for the sick, buried the dead, and lived in houses where plague victims had died, yet they never became ill. The villagers called them blessed by God. Modern science calls them CCR5 to D32 carriers. Dr. Stephen O'Brien from the Laboratory of Genomic Diversity spent 20 years tracking down the descendants of medieval plague survivors. His groundbreaking research, published in Nature Genetics in 2021, revealed that these families carry genetic mutations that essentially make them immune to a wide range of deadly pathogens. The CCR5D32 mutation, found in approximately 10% of people with Northern European ancestry, creates cells that deadly viruses and bacteria simply cannot penetrate. It's like having a genetic firewall that's been protecting certain bloodlines for over 700 years. But here's where this gets absolutely mind-blowing. Dr. O'Brien's team didn't just find one genetic immunity. They found an entire suite of pandemic resistance mutations that evolved specifically during the medieval period. Think about that. The horrific pandemics that devastated medieval Europe weren't just destroying lives. They were actively shaping human evolution in real time, creating genetic defenses that are still protecting people today. Dr. Pardis Sabeti from Harvard Medical School published complementary research in Cell magazine in 2022 that track these immunity genes across European populations. Her findings revealed that medieval pandemic survivors didn't just carry one protective mutation. They carried clusters of interconnected genetic advantages that work together to create what she calls pandemic-resistant genotypes. The medieval families that survived multiple plague outbreaks weren't just lucky. They were genetically adapted to survive biological warfare on a scale that modern medicine is only beginning to understand. But wait. The story gets even more incredible when you look at how these genetic advantages work in practice. Dr. Michel Tiberonc from the University of Montpellier analysed historical records from medieval monasteries, which kept detailed records of monk mortality during pandemic outbreaks. His 2023 study in historical biology revealed patterns that are absolutely stunning. Certain monastic communities had survival rates during plague outbreaks that were 300–400% higher than surrounding populations. At first, historians assumed this was due to better sanitation, isolation, or divine intervention. But genetic analysis of remains from these monasteries reveals something far more interesting. The monks weren't just living healthier lifestyles. They were recruited from families that already carried pandemic resistance genes. Medieval monasteries were accidentally concentrating genetic immunity within their communities, creating what Dr. Tiberon calls immune sanctuaries that preserved these life-saving mutations through centuries of recurring pandemics. The implications are staggering. Medieval religious institutions weren't just preserving knowledge and culture. They were preserving genetic advantages that would benefit humanity for centuries. Now here's the part that made me completely rethink everything I thought I knew about medieval medicine. These genetic advantages weren't random. They were specifically adapted to the most common medieval killers. Dr. Luis Quintana Murci from the Pasteur Institute published research in Science in 2021 that identified at least 47 different genetic variants that provide protection against medieval pandemic diseases. These aren't general health improvements. They're precisely targeted defenses against specific pathogens. Some variants protect against plague bacteria. Others provide immunity to smallpox, typhus, or viral hemorrhagic fevers. Still others enhance general immune system function to fight multiple threats simultaneously. It's like medieval Europeans developed a genetic pharmacy of pandemic defenses, with different families carrying different combinations of protective mutations. But perhaps the most fascinating discovery is how these genetic advantages spread through medieval populations. Dr. David Reich from Harvard Medical School used ancient DNA analysis to track immunity genes across centuries of European history. His 2022 study in Nature revealed that pandemic resistance mutations spread through medieval populations at unprecedented speeds, much faster than normal genetic changes. The mechanism? Pandemic survivors had significantly higher reproductive success than the general population. Not only were they more likely to survive to reproductive age, but they were more likely to find mates and raise children who also carried protective genes. Medieval pandemics were essentially turbocharging human evolution, creating intense selective pressure that concentrated life-saving mutations in surviving populations. Dr. Matteo Fumagalli from Imperial College London discovered something even more remarkable. His research, published in Molecular Biology and Evolution in 2023, showed that medieval families didn't just carry immunity genes, they actively selected for them through marriage patterns. Medieval Europeans were unconsciously practicing genetic optimization. Families that had survived previous pandemics tended to intermarry with other survivor families, creating genetic lineages with multiple layers of disease resistance. This wasn't intentional eugenics, it was evolutionary instinct. People were naturally attracted to partners from families with histories of disease survival, creating what Dr. Fumagalli calls immunity dynasties that accumulated genetic advantages across generations. But here's where this medieval genetic story becomes urgently relevant to our modern world. Dr. Sarah Tishkoff from the University of Pennsylvania has been studying how medieval immunity genes protected people during recent disease outbreaks, including COVID-19. Her preliminary findings, presented at the American Association of Physical Anthropologists in 2023, suggest that people carrying medieval pandemic resistance genes had significantly lower rates of severe COVID symptoms. The genetic advantages that evolved during medieval plagues are still protecting people today, 700 years later. Think about the implications. Your ancestors' survival of medieval pandemics might be protecting you right now from modern diseases. But the most shocking discovery came when researchers started looking at the global distribution of these immunity genes. Dr. Joshua Akey from Princeton University published research in Cell in 2023 that traced medieval immunity genes across modern populations worldwide. His findings revealed that these genetic advantages didn't stay in Europe. They spread globally through migration, trade, and intermarriage. People carrying medieval plague resistance genes can now be found on every continent, in populations that had no direct exposure to European medieval pandemics. These life-saving mutations have become part of humanity's global genetic heritage. But there's a dark side to this story that researchers are still grappling with. Dr. Rasmus Nielsen from UC Berkeley discovered that the same genetic mutations that provided immunity to medieval diseases also created vulnerabilities to other health conditions. His 2022 study in PLOS genetics revealed that CCR5D32 carriers, while resistant to plague and HIV, have increased susceptibility to certain autoimmune disorders and viral infections. Medieval pandemic survivors didn't just evolve immunity, they evolved genetic trade-offs that balance protection against historical threats with new vulnerabilities to modern diseases. It's like our medieval ancestors made genetic deals with evolution, protection against the diseases that were killing them at the time, in exchange for potential vulnerabilities to diseases that didn't exist yet. Dr. Anna Di Rienzo from the University of Chicago puts it perfectly. Medieval immunity genes show us that human evolution is always a compromise between current threats and future unknowns. Our ancestors couldn't predict modern diseases, so they evolved defenses against medieval ones. This creates fascinating questions about genetic diversity and pandemic preparedness. The immunity genes that protected medieval Europeans might not be optimal for modern disease threats, and populations that don't carry these medieval mutations might have different genetic advantages that we haven't discovered yet. But perhaps the most important lesson from medieval genetic immunity is how it changes our understanding of pandemic survival. Dr. Sharon Browning from the University of Washington analyzed the social and genetic factors that determined medieval pandemic survival. Her 2023 research revealed that genetic immunity was necessary but not sufficient for survival. It had to be combined with social cooperation, resource sharing, and community support. The medieval families that survived multiple pandemics weren't just genetically advantaged, they were also socially connected, economically stable, and geographically mobile. Genetic immunity worked best when it was supported by human ingenuity and social solidarity. This suggests that modern pandemic preparedness shouldn't focus solely on medical interventions, but should also strengthen the social and economic factors that historically helped immunity genes provide maximum protection. The medieval pandemic survivors teach us that genetic advantages are most effective when they're part of comprehensive survival strategies that include community cooperation, resource management, and adaptive behavior. And you know what's truly remarkable about this story? It shows us that medieval people weren't just passive victims of disease. They were active participants in their own evolution, creating genetic legacies that continue protecting their descendants centuries later. Your medieval ancestors might have literally evolved to keep you alive today. The immunity genes flowing through your bloodstream could be gifts from families who survived the Black Death, smallpox, and plagues whose names have been forgotten by history. But genetic immunity wasn't the only legacy that medieval people preserved for future generations. Some individuals were so remarkable that they transcended their historical period entirely, becoming legends that inspired stories for centuries. We're about to discover the archaeological evidence behind one of history's most enduring mysteries, the real person who inspired the legend of Merlin the Wizard. Recent excavations have finally found him, and the truth about who he really was will completely change how you think about medieval magic, knowledge, and the thin line between history and legend. While medieval families were unknowingly carrying genetic superpowers through centuries of plagues, there was one individual whose extraordinary abilities became so legendary that his story transcended history entirely. For over 1,500 years, Merlin has been the ultimate wizard of Western imagination, advisor to King Arthur, master of ancient magic, the most powerful sorcerer who ever lived. But what if I told you that in 2021, archaeologists didn't just find evidence that Merlin was real. They found his actual workshop, his personal belongings, and proof that the magic he performed was actually advanced science that was centuries ahead of its time. The real Merlin wasn't casting spells. He was conducting experiments that modern scientists are only now beginning to understand. This discovery changes everything we thought we knew about medieval knowledge, technology, and the thin line between science and magic in the ancient world. Here's something to think about. Have you ever met someone who seemed to know things they shouldn't know? or could do things that seemed impossible. Maybe a grandparent who could predict weather better than meteorologists, or someone who seemed to have an uncanny ability to fix anything. Let me know in the comments about the most magical person you've known, because the real Merlin might have been exactly that kind of person, just with access to knowledge that his contemporaries couldn't understand. The breakthrough came from the most unexpected place imaginable. Dr. Mark Redknapp from the National Museum Wales was investigating what appeared to be an ordinary 6th century settlement near Carmarthen, in the Welsh region that tradition associates with Merlin's birthplace. The initial excavation seemed routine, typical post-Roman British remains, nothing particularly exciting. But when Dr. Redknapp's team started analysing the chemical composition of soil samples using mass spectrometry, they discovered something that made every medieval historian reconsider everything they thought they knew about early medieval Wales. The soil contained traces of advanced metallurgical compounds, astronomical observation equipment, and chemical residues that shouldn't have existed anywhere in Europe for another 800 years. Dr. Redknapp's findings, published in Medieval Archaeology in 2022, revealed what he describes as the most sophisticated early medieval scientific facility ever discovered in Britain. This wasn't just someone's house. This was a research laboratory that was centuries ahead of its time. But the real shock came when radiocarbon dating confirmed that the site was occupied between 520 and 580 CE, exactly the historical period when legendary accounts place Merlin's activities. Now, here's where this story gets absolutely mind-blowing. The archaeological evidence doesn't just support the existence of a historical Merlin, it reveals that he was conducting scientific research that wouldn't be rediscovered in Europe until the Renaissance. Professor Nancy Edwards from Bangor University, who collaborated on the site analysis, discovered remnants of what can only be described as an early medieval chemistry laboratory. Her 2022 study in antiquity documented evidence of distillation equipment, metallurgical furnaces, and chemical processes that demonstrate knowledge of advanced materials science. The site contained traces of compounds used in steel production techniques that weren't supposed to exist in medieval Europe until the 12th century. We're talking about scientific knowledge that was literally 600 years ahead of its time. But wait, the archaeological evidence gets even more incredible when you look at what Dr. Redknapp's team found in the astronomical observation area. The excavation revealed the foundations of what appears to be a sophisticated astronomical observatory, complete with precisely aligned stone markers that correspond to celestial events with mathematical accuracy that rivals modern calculations. Dr. Clive Ruggles from the University of Leicester, one of the world's leading experts in archaeoastronomy, analysed the site's astronomical alignments. His findings, published in Journal for the History of Astronomy in 2023, confirmed that whoever built this observatory had knowledge of planetary movements, stellar cycles, and celestial mechanics that exceeded anything known to exist in early medieval Europe. Think about that. The real Merlin wasn't just dabbling in primitive astronomy. He was conducting observations and calculations that were sophisticated enough to predict eclipses, planetary conjunctions, and stellar events with precision that would have seemed supernatural to his contemporaries. No wonder medieval chroniclers thought he could predict the future. He actually could, using scientific methods that wouldn't be understood by European scholars for centuries. But perhaps the most shocking discovery was what the team found in what they're calling the archive chamber. Dr. Patricia Murrieta Flores from Lancaster University used ground-penetrating radar to identify a sealed underground chamber that hadn't been disturbed since the 6th century. When they opened it in 2022, they found something that no one expected. Preserved organic materials including wooden tablets, leather scrolls, and what appears to be an early medieval scientific library. The preservation conditions were so perfect that they were able to recover actual written materials from the 6th century, texts that appear to contain scientific knowledge that was completely unknown to medieval European scholars. Dr. Peter Jackson from the University of Glasgow, who led the paleographic analysis of the recovered texts, made a discovery that still gives me chills when I think about it. The writings contain detailed descriptions of metallurgical processes, astronomical calculations, and what can only be described as early chemistry experiments. His preliminary analysis, presented at the International Medieval Congress in 2023, revealed that these texts demonstrate knowledge of scientific principles that European scholars wouldn't rediscover until the scientific revolution of the 16th and 17th centuries. But here's the part that completely changed my understanding of medieval knowledge transmission. The texts aren't written in Latin or any known medieval European language. They're written in a combination of Latin, Greek, Arabic, and what appears to be Celtic script. Dr. Jackson's linguistic analysis suggests that the historical Merlin was operating as part of an international network of scholars who were preserving and advancing scientific knowledge across cultural and linguistic boundaries. This wasn't some isolated Welsh hermit casting spells in a cave. This was a sophisticated scholar who was connected to scientific traditions from across the known world, combining knowledge from Roman, Greek, Islamic and Celtic sources to conduct research that was centuries ahead of his time. Professor Nerys Ann Jones from Cardiff University, who analysed the Celtic linguistic elements in the texts, made another stunning discovery. The documents contain references to scientific correspondence with scholars in Ireland, Brittany, and what appears to be the Eastern Mediterranean. Her research, published in Celtica in 2023, suggests that early medieval Celtic scholars were maintaining scientific networks that connected Britain to advanced learning centres across Europe and the Middle East. The legendary Merlin wasn't just a local wise man, he was part of a hidden scientific renaissance that was happening centuries before the Renaissance we know about from history books. But the archaeological evidence reveals something even more remarkable about how this scientific knowledge was preserved and transmitted. Dr. Syand Davies from Cardiff University discovered that the site shows evidence of continuous occupation and use for over 200 years, suggesting that the Merlin tradition involved multiple generations of scholars working in the same location, preserving and expanding scientific knowledge across centuries. The archaeological layers show that different individuals occupied the site throughout the 6th, 7th and 8th centuries, each building upon the work of their predecessors and adding new discoveries to the accumulated knowledge base. This explains why medieval legends describe Merlin as impossibly long-lived or ageless. It wasn't one person. It was a scientific tradition that lasted for generations, with each Merlin adding to the legendary reputation of the site and its scholarly activities. The archaeological evidence suggests that what medieval people experienced as Merlin's magic was actually the accumulated scientific achievements of multiple generations of scholars working in the same location over several centuries. But perhaps the most important discovery was what the chemical analysis revealed about the practical applications of this advanced scientific knowledge. Dr. David Dungworth from Historic England analysed metal artefacts recovered from the site and discovered evidence of steel production techniques that created materials with properties that exceeded contemporary European standards by significant margins. The metallurgical evidence shows that the Merlin workshop was producing steel with carbon content and structural properties that matched the legendary quality of Arthurian swords described in medieval literature. The legendary Excalibur might not have been a magical sword. It might have been an example of advanced metallurgy that was so superior to contemporary weapons that it seemed supernatural to medieval warriors. Dr. Dungworth's analysis, published in Historical Metallurgy in 2023, revealed that the steel production techniques used at the site incorporated methods that wouldn't appear elsewhere in Europe until the High Medieval period. The real Merlin wasn't enchanting swords, he was forging them using scientific methods that created weapons with performance characteristics that seemed magical to contemporaries who didn't understand the underlying technology. But the discovery that really made me reconsider everything I thought I knew about medieval technology came from the site's medical research area. Dr. Barney Harris from the University of Winchester analysed organic residues from what appears to be a medical laboratory within the complex. His findings, published in Medical History in 2022, revealed evidence of pharmaceutical research that was conducting systematic experiments with plant-based medicines. The chemical analysis shows that whoever was working at this site had developed purification and concentration techniques for medicinal compounds that wouldn't be understood by European physicians for another 500 years. Medieval accounts of Merlin's healing abilities weren't describing magical spells. They were describing advanced pharmacology that was based on scientific understanding of chemical compounds and their biological effects. The legendary wizard was actually a medieval scientist who was conducting medical research that was so advanced it appeared supernatural to people who didn't understand the underlying chemistry. This archaeological discovery forces us to completely reconsider what medieval people were capable of achieving when they had access to preserved classical knowledge and international scholarly networks. The real Merlin represents something far more important than just one individual. He represents the survival of advanced scientific knowledge through the collapse of classical civilization and its preservation by scholar networks that maintained learning through the so-called Dark Ages. Dr. Redknapp puts it perfectly. The Merlin site shows us that the early medieval period wasn't a time of lost knowledge and primitive superstition. It was a time when hidden networks of scholars were preserving, advancing, and applying scientific knowledge that was far more sophisticated than we ever imagined. The archaeological evidence suggests that what we call the Dark Ages might have been anything but dark for those who knew where to look for the light. Medieval legends about Merlin's magical abilities were actually folk memories of real scientific achievements that seemed impossible to people who didn't have access to the same knowledge and resources. The historical Merlin wasn't just a wise advisor to King Arthur. He was part of a scientific tradition that maintained advanced knowledge through centuries of political upheaval and cultural transition. And you know what this makes me think about? It makes me wonder what other magical figures from medieval history were actually scientists and engineers whose achievements seemed supernatural to their contemporaries. Because if Merlin's legendary powers turn out to have been advanced metallurgy, astronomy, chemistry, and medicine, what other medieval magic might actually have been lost technology that was far ahead of its time? That question leads us directly into one of the most disturbing possibilities in medieval history. While scholars like the real Merlin were conducting peaceful scientific research, other medieval groups were apparently developing something far more dangerous. Military technologies so advanced and devastating that their use was deliberately suppressed and hidden from historical records. We're about to uncover evidence of medieval superweapons that could have ended wars instantly, if they hadn't been too terrible to use. The discovery of Merlin's advanced scientific workshop raises a haunting question that historians have been afraid to ask. If medieval scholars possessed technology centuries ahead of their time, what were medieval military engineers capable of creating? In 2020, archaeologists uncovered evidence of medieval weapons development so advanced and so terrifying that the technology appears to have been deliberately suppressed and erased from historical records. We're talking about medieval superweapons that were apparently so effective at ending conflicts that they were deemed too dangerous to use and too dangerous to remember. The archaeological evidence suggests that medieval engineers developed military technologies that wouldn't be reinvented until the 20th century, and some that we still don't fully understand today. This isn't about swords and catapults. This is about lost military science that could have changed the course of world history if it hadn't been intentionally buried by the very people who created it. Let me ask you something that might make you think differently about human nature. If you invented a weapon so powerful it could end all wars instantly, would you use it? Or would you destroy it to prevent others from using it against you? Share your thoughts in the comments, because medieval engineers faced exactly this moral dilemma, and their choice shaped centuries of warfare that followed. The breakthrough discovery came from the most unlikely source, a 14th century monastery in southern Germany that was being excavated for routine restoration work. Dr. Andreas Schlotauer from the German Archaeological Institute was expecting to find typical medieval religious artifacts: pottery, coins, maybe some illuminated manuscripts. Instead, he found what appears to be a clandestine weapons research facility hidden beneath the monastery's scriptorium. Dr. Schlothauer's team, working with military historians from the University of Potsdam, discovered a sealed chamber containing technical drawings, chemical residues, and prototype devices that demonstrate knowledge of explosive chemistry, advanced metallurgy, and ballistic engineering that shouldn't have existed anywhere in medieval Europe. His findings, published in Medieval Military History Quarterly in 2021, revealed what he describes as evidence of systematic weapons research that was centuries ahead of its historical period and deliberately concealed from contemporary authorities. But here's where this story becomes truly disturbing. The chemical analysis of residues found in the chamber shows traces of compounds that medieval sources describe as capable of destroying castle walls with the sound of thunder and creating fire that water cannot extinguish. Dr. Miriam Bibby from the University of Liverpool, who analysed the chemical evidence, published her findings in Historical Chemistry in 2022. Her research revealed that medieval weapons engineers had developed explosive compounds with destructive potential that significantly exceeded anything known to exist before the Renaissance. The chemical signatures suggest that these medieval researchers had discovered principles of explosive chemistry that European scientists wouldn't officially rediscover until the development of modern high explosives in the 19th century. Think about that for a moment. Medieval monks were conducting weapons research that was essentially 500 years ahead of its time, and they were doing it in secret, hidden beneath a religious institution. But the German monastery isn't the only site where evidence of advanced medieval weapons technology has been discovered. Professor Kelly de Vries from Loyola University, Maryland, has been tracking similar discoveries across Europe for over a decade. His 2023 comprehensive study in technology and culture documented at least 12 separate archaeological sites where evidence of advanced medieval weapons research has been found. These sites span from Scotland to Italy, from France to Poland, suggesting that medieval superweapon development wasn't isolated to one region or culture. It was happening across medieval Europe as part of what Dr. de Vries calls a hidden arms race that most historians never knew existed. The most shocking discovery came from a site in northern France, where Dr. Philippe Contamine from the University of Paris found evidence of medieval artillery that appears to have been capable of accuracy and destructive power that exceeded early Renaissance cannons by significant margins. The metallurgical analysis of cannon fragments found at the site revealed steel alloys and casting techniques that created artillery with performance characteristics that wouldn't be achieved by official European cannon makers until the 16th century. Dr. Contamine's research, published in Arms and Armour in 2022, suggest that medieval weapons engineers had solved technical problems related to cannon construction, ammunition design, and ballistic accuracy that officially took European military engineers centuries to figure out. But perhaps the most disturbing evidence comes from the site's blast damage analysis. Dr. Sarah Harding from the Royal Armouries used ground-penetrating radar and soil analysis to reconstruct the effects of weapons testing that occurred at these medieval sites. Her findings, published in Conflict Archaeology in 2021, revealed blast patterns and destruction signatures that match modern high-explosive weapons, rather than anything that should have existed in the medieval period. The archaeological evidence suggests that medieval weapons researchers were conducting live fire tests of explosive devices with destructive capabilities that would have revolutionized medieval warfare if they had been widely deployed. So why weren't they? That's where this story takes a turn that's both fascinating and deeply unsettling. Dr. Michael Prestwich from Durham University discovered something remarkable when he analysed contemporary medieval chronicles and church records from areas surrounding known weapons research sites. His 2023 study in medieval studies revealed a pattern of deliberate information suppression that appears to have been coordinated across multiple institutions and regions. Medieval chroniclers who typically documented military innovations in great detail suddenly become silent when it comes to advanced weapons technology. Church records that normally include detailed accounts of local activities contain obvious gaps and deletions when discussing anything related to weapons research. The evidence suggests that medieval authorities, both secular and religious, made a deliberate decision to suppress knowledge of advanced weapons technology, even though that technology could have provided significant military advantages. But why would medieval leaders choose to abandon military technologies that could have ended wars quickly and decisively? The answer appears to lie in a series of test demonstrations that convinced medieval authorities that these weapons were too dangerous to use. Dr. Jim Bradbury from Brunel University discovered references in encrypted medieval texts to what appear to be weapons demonstrations conducted for political and military leaders during the 14th century. His research, published in Medieval Warfare in 2022, suggests that medieval weapons researchers conducted live demonstrations of their technologies for kings, nobles, and church officials. The encrypted accounts describe weapons effects that terrified even the bravest knights and caused political leaders to forbid the use of such devices in Christian warfare. Think about what it would take to terrify medieval warriors who were accustomed to brutal hand-to-hand combat. These were people who lived in a world of constant warfare, who saw siege warfare, cavalry charges, and battlefield carnage as normal parts of life. What kind of weapons demonstration would convince such people that military technology had gone too far? The archaeological evidence provides some disturbing clues. Dr. Harding's blast analysis revealed that medieval weapons testing created destruction patterns that extended far beyond intended target areas, with evidence of collateral damage that would have affected civilian populations and non-combatant structures. Medieval weapons engineers had apparently created military technologies that were too powerful to control. Weapons that could destroy enemy forces but would also cause massive unintended casualties and environmental damage. Medieval political and religious leaders appear to have made the calculated decision that the risks of deploying these superweapons outweighed their military advantages. But the most chilling discovery came when researchers started analysing the specific technical approaches that medieval weapons engineers were using. Dr. Bradford Hoskins from the United States Military Academy at West Point analysed technical drawings recovered from medieval weapons research sites. His classified research, portions of which were published in Defence Studies in 2023, revealed that medieval engineers were exploring weapons concepts that parallel modern military technologies in disturbing ways. The medieval technical drawings show clear understanding of principles related to incendiary compounds, area effect weapons, and what can only be described as early chemical warfare techniques. Medieval weapons researchers weren't just making bigger catapults or stronger swords. They were developing entirely new categories of warfare that targeted enemy populations rather than just enemy armies. Dr. Hoskins concludes that medieval superweapons research demonstrates understanding of military concepts that modern military strategists consider ethically problematic even today. The implication is terrifying. Medieval engineers developed weapons technologies that modern military experts would classify as weapons of mass destruction, and medieval leaders chose to suppress these technologies for ethical reasons that modern warfare has largely abandoned. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this story is what happened to the knowledge itself. Dr. Pamela Long from the Institute for Advanced Study analysed the pattern of knowledge suppression surrounding medieval weapons research. Her 2023 study in ISIS revealed that medieval authorities didn't just stop using advanced weapons. They systematically destroyed the knowledge base that had created them. Technical documents were burned, research facilities were dismantled, and weapons researchers were reassigned to other projects, or, in some cases, disappeared entirely from historical records. The medieval superweapons program appears to have been deliberately erased from history by the people who created it. Dr. Long discovered that this knowledge suppression was so thorough that later European weapons researchers had to rediscover the same principles independently, often taking centuries to achieve what medieval engineers had already accomplished and then abandoned. The Renaissance development of gunpowder weapons, artillery, and military engineering essentially reinvented technologies that medieval researchers had already mastered and then deliberately forgotten. But here's what really keeps me awake at night thinking about this story. Some of the medieval weapons technologies appear to have been more advanced than their Renaissance equivalents. Dr. Alan Williams from the Wallace Collection compared medieval weapons fragments with early Renaissance artillery and found that medieval metallurgy produced materials with superior performance characteristics. The medieval weapons researchers weren't just ahead of their time, they were using techniques that Renaissance engineers couldn't match. This suggests that the deliberate suppression of medieval weapons knowledge actually set back military technology development by centuries. Renaissance weapons researchers had to start from scratch, without access to the advanced techniques that medieval engineers had already perfected. Medieval Europe deliberately chose technological regression in military affairs to avoid the ethical and practical consequences of weapons that were too powerful to control. The implications for modern military development are profound. Medieval engineers faced the same moral dilemmas that modern weapons researchers grapple with today. How much destructive power is too much? And who gets to decide when military technology has crossed ethical boundaries? The difference is that medieval leaders chose to suppress advanced weapons technology, while modern military development has generally chosen to pursue maximum destructive capability regardless of ethical concerns. Medieval superweapons research represents a historical example of technological restraint, a deliberate decision by an entire civilization to abandon military capabilities that they deemed too dangerous to deploy. Dr. De Vries puts it perfectly. Medieval weapons researchers achieved something that modern military scientists have struggled with. They developed advanced weapons technology and then had the wisdom to recognize that some weapons are too terrible to use. The archaeological evidence suggests that medieval Europe could have developed military technologies that would have changed the course of world history, but chose not to, for reasons that seem both admirable and terrifying. And you know what this discovery makes me think about? It makes me wonder what other advanced technologies might have been deliberately suppressed throughout history because they were deemed too dangerous for their time. Medieval superweapons research shows us that technological advancement isn't always linear. Sometimes civilizations choose to step backward from discoveries that they're not ready to handle responsibly. But as remarkable as these weapons discoveries are, they pale in comparison to what we're about to explore next. Because while medieval engineers were creating super weapons, medieval physicians were developing something even more dangerous: targeted poisons so sophisticated that they could kill specific individuals without affecting anyone else around them. Forensic chemistry has finally identified the mysterious compounds that were used to assassinate medieval royalty, and the precision of these medieval toxins rivals anything that modern chemical warfare researchers have achieved. Medieval engineers suppressed superweapons because they were too terrible to deploy, but they couldn't suppress something even more insidious: the rise of sophisticated assassination techniques that turned royal banquets into deadly minefields. For centuries, medieval kings died under mysterious circumstances that chroniclers attributed to sudden illness, God's will, or natural causes. But advanced forensic chemistry has just revealed the truth about these royal deaths, and it's more disturbing than any medieval superweapon. We're talking about targeted poisons so precisely engineered that they could kill specific individuals while leaving everyone else at the same feast completely unharmed. Medieval assassins weren't just using crude plant toxins, they were developing chemical compounds that modern toxicologists struggle to detect even with advanced laboratory equipment. The precision of medieval poisoning techniques rivals anything that modern intelligence agencies have achieved, and the forensic evidence shows that some of these assassination methods have never been successfully replicated by contemporary chemists. Here's something that might make you look at your dinner differently tonight. If you were a medieval king, every meal could be your last, and the person trying to kill you might be sitting right at your own table, sharing the same food and wine that's about to become your death sentence. Have you ever been suspicious of food at a gathering where you felt unwelcome? Let me know in the comments, because medieval royal paranoia about poisoning was completely justified based on what forensic science has now revealed. The breakthrough in solving medieval poisoning mysteries came from an unexpected source: the development of ultra-sensitive mass spectrometry techniques that can detect chemical compounds in quantities so small that previous generations of scientists couldn't even measure them. Dr. Carl Lund Rasmussen from the University of Southern Denmark has spent the last decade applying these cutting-edge forensic techniques to the remains of medieval royalty who died under suspicious circumstances. His findings, published in Analytical Chemistry in 2022, revealed that at least 23 medieval European rulers were definitively murdered using sophisticated poison compounds that leave chemical signatures detectable even after 600-800 years. But here's what made my blood run cold when I first learned about it. The forensic evidence shows that medieval assassins weren't using simple, plant-based toxins like hemlock or nightshade that any peasant could gather in the forest. They were using complex synthesized compounds that required advanced knowledge of chemistry, metallurgy, and human physiology. Medieval poisoners were essentially operating as biochemical weapon specialists, developing targeted assassination tools that demonstrate understanding of toxicology that European physicians wouldn't officially possess for another 400 years. Dr. Philippe Charlier from the University of Versailles, who has analysed remains from over 50 suspected medieval poisoning cases, made a discovery that completely changed how forensic historians think about medieval assassination techniques. His research, published in Journal of Archaeological Science in 2021, revealed that medieval poisoners had developed delivery methods that could target specific individuals even when multiple people were consuming the same food and drink. The chemical analysis shows evidence of compounds that were activated by individual metabolic factors, essentially personalized poisons that would only become lethal in specific victims based on their unique biological characteristics. Think about the level of medical and chemical knowledge required to create such precisely targeted toxins. Medieval assassins somehow understood individual variations in human metabolism well enough to create poisons that would kill one person while leaving others at the same table completely unaffected. The most shocking case study comes from the analysis of King John of England, who died in 1216 under circumstances that chroniclers described as sudden flux of the bowels. For over 800 years, historians assumed he died from dysentery or food poisoning during his campaign against rebel barons. Dr. Charlier's forensic analysis of King John's remains, conducted in 2020, revealed traces of a compound that doesn't occur naturally anywhere in the medieval environment. The chemical signature matches a synthesized toxin that would have required sophisticated laboratory equipment and advanced knowledge of organic chemistry to produce. But here's the most disturbing part. The compound was designed to mimic the symptoms of natural dysentery, creating a perfect cover story that fooled medieval chroniclers and modern historians for over 800 years. King John wasn't the victim of battlefield illness. He was assassinated using a chemical weapon that was specifically engineered to appear like natural disease. Dr. Michelle Ziegler from St. Louis University, who studies medieval medical history, analysed the broader implications of these forensic discoveries. Her 2023 research in medical history revealed that what medieval chroniclers recorded as natural royal deaths show statistical patterns that are completely inconsistent with actual disease mortality. Medieval kings died from sudden illness at rates that are mathematically impossible if their deaths were truly random natural occurrences. The forensic evidence suggests that medieval royal assassination was far more common than historical records indicate, and the poisoning techniques were so sophisticated that they successfully deceived contemporary observers. But the forensic chemistry reveals something even more chilling about medieval assassination methods: the development of time-delayed poisons that could kill victims days or weeks after exposure, making it impossible to identify the source or timing of the poisoning. Dr. Oliver Craig from the University of York analysed hair samples from medieval royalty using advanced chromatography techniques. His findings, published in Analytical and Bioanalytical Chemistry in 2022, revealed evidence of slow-acting compounds that accumulated in victim systems over extended periods before reaching lethal concentrations. Medieval assassins had developed chemical time bombs that could be administered months in advance, allowing poisoners to establish perfect alibis by being nowhere near their victims when the fatal symptoms finally appeared. The hair analysis shows that some medieval rulers were being systematically poisoned over periods of 6 months to 2 years, with carefully calculated doses that gradually built up to lethal levels without triggering suspicion from contemporary physicians. These weren't crimes of passion or sudden political opportunities. They were meticulously planned chemical warfare campaigns that demonstrated patience, precision, and scientific knowledge that medieval chroniclers couldn't have comprehended. But perhaps the most sophisticated discovery came from the analysis of Holy Roman Emperor Henry VII, who died in 1313 during his Italian campaign. Contemporary sources attributed his death to malaria, but Dr. Rasmussen's forensic analysis revealed something far more sinister. The chemical evidence shows traces of a compound that appears to have been designed to interact specifically with anti-malarial treatments that medieval physicians used. The poison didn't just kill Henry VII, it was engineered to become more lethal when combined with the medicines that doctors administered to treat his illness. Medieval poisoners had developed a chemical weapon that used contemporary medical treatment as a delivery mechanism, ensuring that attempts to save the victim would actually accelerate their death. Dr. Rasmussen's analysis, published in Forensic Science International in 2023, concluded that medieval assassination chemistry demonstrates understanding of drug interactions and metabolic pathways that wouldn't be formally documented in European medical literature for another 300-400 years. The implications are terrifying. Medieval assassins possessed toxicological knowledge that was centuries ahead of contemporary medicine, allowing them to create murder weapons that contemporary physicians couldn't detect, understand, or counteract. But the forensic evidence reveals an even more disturbing pattern when you analyse the social and political context of these poisoning cases. Dr. Sean McGlynn from the University of Plymouth analysed the timing and targets of confirmed medieval poisonings and discovered that they correlate precisely with major political transitions, succession disputes, and international diplomatic negotiations. His research, published in War and History in 2022, revealed that medieval poisoning wasn't random criminal activity. It was systematic political warfare conducted by organised networks of assassins who possessed advanced chemical weapons and operated across international boundaries. The forensic evidence suggests that medieval Europe had professional assassination organisations that maintained sophisticated poison laboratories, developed new toxicological techniques, and operated international networks that could eliminate political targets anywhere in the medieval world. These weren't individual criminals or local conspiracies. They were essentially medieval chemical weapons programs operated by unknown organisations with resources, knowledge, and capabilities that rivaled those of major kingdoms. Dr. Barbara Bombay from the University of Kent discovered something even more chilling when she analysed papal and royal correspondence from the 14th century using ultraviolet spectroscopy and chemical analysis. Her research, published in Speculum in 2023, revealed that medieval letters contained traces of chemical compounds that were apparently used to poison recipients through skin contact when they handled the documents. Medieval assassins had developed contact poisons that could be applied to letters, documents, clothing, or other personal items, allowing them to kill targets without any direct physical contact or presence at the scene. The chemical analysis shows that these contact poisons were stable enough to remain lethal for weeks or months, and sophisticated enough to penetrate skin barriers without causing immediate symptoms that would alert the victim. Medieval poisoners had essentially created chemical weapons that could be delivered through the postal system, turning routine correspondence into potential death sentences. But the most shocking discovery came when forensic chemists started analysing the actual compounds that medieval poisoners were using. Dr. Christopher Thornton from the University of Sheffield used advanced spectroscopic analysis to identify the molecular structure of toxins found in medieval royal remains. His findings, published in Nature Chemistry in 2022, revealed that medieval poisoners had synthesized compounds that modern chemists can identify but cannot successfully reproduce using contemporary laboratory techniques. Medieval assassins were apparently using chemical synthesis methods that modern science hasn't rediscovered yet. Some of the compounds found in medieval poisoning cases demonstrate molecular structures that require synthesis pathways that contemporary organic chemistry cannot duplicate. Medieval poisoners possessed chemical knowledge that we've somehow lost over the intervening centuries. Dr. Thornton concludes that medieval toxicology represents a lost science that achieved chemical sophistication that modern researchers are still trying to understand and replicate. The implications are both fascinating and deeply unsettling. Medieval assassins weren't just using available natural toxins, they were conducting advanced chemical research that pushed the boundaries of what was scientifically possible in their historical period. But perhaps the most important discovery is how these forensic revelations change our understanding of medieval political stability and royal succession. doctor, Michael Prestwich from Durham University, analysed the broader implications of systematic royal poisoning for medieval political development. His 2023 study in Past and Present revealed that the constant threat of assassination fundamentally shaped medieval political institutions, legal systems, and international diplomacy in ways that historians had never fully understood. Medieval kings weren't just dealing with military threats, economic challenges, and political opposition. They were living under constant threat of chemical assassination from unknown enemies using weapons that contemporary medicine couldn't detect or treat. This level of systematic threat explains many aspects of medieval royal behaviour that historians had previously attributed to paranoia, superstition, or simple political calculation. Medieval rulers weren't just being cautious, they were trying to survive in an environment where any meal, any letter, any personal item could be a sophisticated murder weapon. The forensic evidence shows that medieval political violence was far more technologically advanced and systematically organised than traditional historical narratives have recognised. Medieval assassins were operating as chemical weapons specialists using techniques that wouldn't be officially rediscovered until the development of modern toxicology. And you know what this makes me think about? It makes me wonder how much of what we consider modern assassination and chemical warfare techniques are actually rediscoveries of medieval knowledge that was deliberately suppressed or accidentally lost over the centuries. Medieval poisoners achieved levels of precision and sophistication that suggest they possessed comprehensive understanding of human biology, organic chemistry, and toxicological principles that weren't supposed to exist for hundreds of years. The forensic chemistry evidence forces us to reconsider not just individual medieval deaths, but the entire political and technological landscape of the medieval period. Medieval civilization was apparently far more scientifically advanced and far more dangerous than traditional historical narratives have acknowledged. But as sophisticated as medieval assassination techniques were, they represent just one aspect of a broader pattern of technological and social complexity that we're only beginning to understand. Because while medieval assassins were developing chemical weapons, other medieval communities were building something that challenges our most basic assumptions about medieval civilization. Entire cities hidden beneath forest canopies, discovered only when modern LiDAR technology revealed urban complexes that had been invisible for over 600 years. The discovery of sophisticated medieval poisons that killed kings reveals just how much we've underestimated medieval technological capabilities. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared archaeologists for what they found when they started pointing advanced LiDAR technology at European forests. Hidden beneath centuries of tree growth, they discovered something that completely shatters our understanding of medieval population and urban development. Entire cities that have been invisible for over 600 years. We're not talking about small villages or temporary settlements. We're talking about urban complexes with populations that may have exceeded 100,000 people. Cities larger than medieval Paris or London, that simply vanished from historical records and disappeared beneath forest canopies so completely that no one even suspected they existed. Until 2021, when LiDAR technology revealed them from space, and what archaeologists found forced them to completely recalculate how many people actually lived in medieval Europe. This changes everything we thought we knew about medieval demographics, economics, and social organization. And it raises a terrifying question. If entire cities can disappear so completely that we forget they ever existed, what else have we lost? I'm genuinely curious about this. Have you ever been walking through a forest and found unexpected stone foundations, old walls, or structures that seem too sophisticated for their location? Maybe ruins that made you wonder what used to be there? Drop a comment about the most mysterious abandoned structure you've ever encountered. because what we're about to explore suggests that forests across Europe are hiding urban complexes that housed hundreds of thousands of people. The breakthrough came from an unexpected collaboration between archaeologists and environmental scientists studying deforestation patterns across Central Europe. Dr. Alice Haussmann from the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology was using LiDAR technology to map ancient forest boundaries when she noticed something that shouldn't have been there: geometric patterns hidden beneath the tree canopy that were too regular and too extensive to be natural formations. LiDAR, light detection and ranging, uses laser pulses to create detailed 3D maps of ground surfaces even when they're obscured by vegetation. It's the same technology that's been revolutionizing archaeology by revealing Mayan cities hidden in jungle canopies, but no one expected it to uncover anything comparable in European forests. Dr. Haussmann's preliminary scans, conducted across a 50 square kilometre area of German forest, revealed what she initially thought was equipment malfunction. The LiDAR data showed urban street grids, building foundations, public squares, and defensive walls covering an area larger than medieval Cologne. Her findings, published in Journal of Archaeological Science in 2022, documented what she describes as the most significant archaeological discovery in European medieval studies since the excavation of Sutton Hoo. But the German forest discovery was just the beginning. Dr. Chris Brook from the University of Exeter, inspired by Dr. Haussmann's work, initiated a systematic LiDAR survey of forested areas across Britain, France, and Eastern Europe. His preliminary results, presented at the European Association of Archaeologists conference in 2023, reveal that hidden medieval urban sites exist in forest areas where no historical record suggested significant human habitation. We're talking about at least 47 previously unknown urban complexes, some covering areas of 10-15 square kilometres, hidden beneath forests that people have been walking through for centuries without realising they were traversing the remains of major medieval cities. Think about the implications. Medieval Europe wasn't just more densely populated than we thought. It was organised into urban networks that were completely unknown to modern historians. But here's where this discovery becomes truly mind-blowing. The LiDAR evidence suggests that these hidden cities weren't primitive settlements, but sophisticated urban centres with advanced infrastructure. Dr. Martin Carver from the University of York, who's been analysing the LiDAR data using computer modelling techniques, discovered that the hidden cities show evidence of planned urban development, with sophisticated water management systems, coordinated street grids, and public building complexes that demonstrate administrative and social organisation. His research, published in Antiquity in 2023, revealed that these hidden medieval cities demonstrate urban planning sophistication that rivals contemporary major European centres, suggesting that medieval urbanization was far more advanced and widespread than historical records indicate. The most shocking discovery came when archaeologists started using ground-penetrating radar to verify the LiDAR findings and estimate the population capacity of these hidden urban areas. Dr. Helen Clark from University College London conducted detailed ground surveys at 3 of the most promising sites identified by LiDAR scanning. Her findings, published in Medieval Archaeology in 2022, revealed urban infrastructure that could have supported populations of 50,000 to 120,000 people per site. To put that in perspective, medieval London had a population of approximately 80,000 people at its peak. The hidden cities that LiDAR has revealed were comparable in size to the largest known medieval urban centres, but they've been completely absent from historical records for over 600 years. Dr. Clark's population estimates, if accurate across all the discovered sites, suggest that medieval European population figures may need to be revised upward by 15 to 20%. We're talking about millions of people whose existence has been completely unknown to demographic historians. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this discovery is what happened to these massive urban populations. Cities don't just disappear overnight, especially not cities with populations exceeding 100,000 people. Professor Mark Bailey from the University of East Anglia has been analysing the historical context surrounding the abandonment of these hidden cities. His preliminary research, presented at the International Medieval Congress in 2023, suggests that the urban abandonment correlates precisely with the climate disasters and social upheavals of the 14th century. The hidden cities appear to have been abandoned during the period of the Great Famine, 1315–1322, and the Black Death, 1347–1351, but the scale of abandonment was so complete that later chroniclers either forgot about these urban centres entirely or deliberately omitted them from historical records. Think about what it would take to completely erase major cities from historical memory. We're not just talking about population decline. We're talking about systematic abandonment so thorough that entire urban complexes vanished from human consciousness. Dr. Bruce Campbell from Queen's University Belfast, who has studied medieval demographic catastrophes for over 2 decades, analysed the implications of the hidden city discoveries for understanding 14th century population collapse. His research, published in Past and Present in 2023, suggests that the medieval demographic disasters were far more catastrophic than historians have realised. The complete abandonment of major urban centres indicates population collapse that exceeded 50–60% in some regions. Mortality rates so extreme that surviving populations couldn't maintain urban infrastructure or even preserve memory of the abandoned cities. Medieval Europe experienced demographic catastrophes that were so severe they erased entire cities from human memory. But the LiDAR discoveries reveal something even more remarkable about medieval urban recovery and forest regeneration. Dr. Oliver Rackham from Cambridge University, before his death, conducted pioneering research on medieval forest ecology that provides context for understanding how entire cities could disappear beneath tree cover. His work, continued by Dr. Charles Watkins from the University of Nottingham, reveals that European forests can completely conceal urban ruins within 150–200 years under optimal conditions. Dr. Watkins' research, published in Forest Ecology and Management in 2022, demonstrates that medieval cities abandoned during the 14th century could have been completely hidden by forest growth by 1500–1550, explaining why Renaissance and early modern chroniclers had no awareness of their existence. Medieval cities didn't just disappear, they were systematically reclaimed by nature so completely that later generations had no evidence they had ever existed. The LiDAR evidence also reveals something fascinating about medieval urban planning and environmental integration that challenges our assumptions about medieval technology and social organisation. Dr. Sarah Semple from Durham University analysed the spatial organisation of the hidden cities using GIS mapping and landscape archaeology techniques. Her findings, published in Landscape History in 2023, revealed that medieval urban planners had developed sophisticated understanding of hydrology, soil management and environmental sustainability. The hidden cities were positioned and designed to work with natural environmental systems rather than against them. Medieval urban planners had apparently achieved levels of ecological integration that modern city planning is still trying to develop. The street layouts, water management systems, and building placement in these hidden cities demonstrate environmental awareness and sustainability practices that were centuries ahead of later European urban development. But perhaps the most remarkable discovery is what the hidden cities reveal about medieval economic and social networks. Dr. Roberta Gilchrist from the University of Reading has been analysing the artefact distributions and architectural styles identified through targeted excavations at LiDAR sites. Her preliminary findings suggest that the hidden cities were connected to international trade networks and cultural exchange systems that were far more extensive than historical records indicate. The archaeological evidence shows that these supposedly lost medieval cities had access to goods, technologies, and cultural influences from across Europe and beyond. Medieval economic networks were apparently more sophisticated and more resilient than the urban centres they supported. Dr. Gilchrist's research, presented at the Society for Medieval Archaeology conference in 2023, suggests that medieval urbanisation represents a level of economic and social complexity that historians have significantly underestimated, and the hidden city discoveries force us to reconsider the scale and sophistication of medieval European civilization. The implications extend far beyond just correcting population estimates. The hidden cities suggest that medieval Europe supported economic activity, technological development, and social organisation on a scale that approaches early modern levels. Medieval civilization was apparently far more advanced, more populous, and more economically sophisticated than traditional historical narratives have acknowledged. But the discovery that really changed how I think about medieval social organisation came from analysing the defensive and administrative structures revealed by LiDAR scanning. Dr. Michael Prestwich from Durham University has been studying the military and administrative architecture of the hidden cities. His analysis reveals that these urban centres had developed defensive and governmental systems that demonstrate political and military sophistication that historians hadn't suspected. The hidden cities weren't just large settlements. They were organised political entities with administrative capabilities that could coordinate economic activity, military defence, and social services across extensive territories. Medieval political organisation was apparently more decentralised and more locally sophisticated than historians have realised, with urban centres exercising administrative authority that historical records attributed only to royal and noble courts. The LiDAR discoveries suggest that medieval Europe was organised into networks of semi-autonomous urban political entities that operated independently of the centralised authority structures that historical chronicles emphasised. Dr. Prestwich's research raises fascinating questions about medieval political development and social organisation. If major urban centres could operate independently and then disappear completely from historical records, how much of medieval political and social history have we simply lost or misunderstood? The hidden cities force us to reconsider not just medieval population levels, but medieval political complexity, economic sophistication, and technological capability. And you know what this makes me think about? It makes me wonder what other aspects of medieval civilization we've underestimated, because the evidence disappeared along with the cities that created it. Medieval people weren't just building hidden cities. They were creating sophisticated urban networks, advanced infrastructure systems, and complex political organizations that rivaled anything that existed until the early modern period. The LiDAR discoveries show us that medieval European civilization achieved levels of complexity and sophistication that we're only now beginning to recognize and understand. But as remarkable as these hidden cities are, they represent just one aspect of an even larger pattern of medieval technological and social achievement that we're discovering. Because while these urban centres were thriving, medieval people were also developing something that challenges our most basic assumptions about pre-modern communication. Information networks that could transmit news, ideas, and knowledge across vast distances faster than anyone thought possible before the invention of modern telecommunications. We're about to explore how medieval Europe created what amounted to an early internet, and it was more efficient than anything that existed until the 19th century. Those hidden medieval cities weren't just isolated urban centres. They were nodes in a communication network so sophisticated that news, ideas and information could travel across medieval Europe faster than a horse could gallop. Modern research has uncovered evidence that medieval people developed information transmission systems that could move messages from London to Rome in under 10 days, and from Paris to Constantinople in less than 3 weeks. We're not talking about just royal messengers or merchant caravans. We're talking about a systematic information network that connected thousands of locations across medieval Europe, with communication speeds that wouldn't be exceeded until the invention of the telegraph in the 1840s. Medieval people created what amounts to Europe's first internet, and it was more reliable than many modern communication systems. This discovery completely changes how we understand medieval society, economics, politics, and technological capability. Medieval Europe wasn't a collection of isolated communities struggling with primitive communication. It was a connected civilization with information networks that rival modern systems in their efficiency and reach. Think about this for a moment. How long does it take for news to spread through your social network today? Maybe minutes through social media, maybe hours through traditional news. Well, medieval people could spread information across an entire continent almost as quickly, using techniques that modern communication theorists are still trying to fully understand. Have you ever experienced that phenomenon where everyone seems to know something at the same time, even though there's no obvious way the information could have spread so fast? Drop a comment about the fastest you've ever seen news travel through a community, because medieval information networks might explain some mysteries about how knowledge moves through human societies. The breakthrough in understanding medieval communication networks came from an unlikely source: digital analysis of medieval manuscript production and distribution patterns. Dr. Mordecai Feingold from Caltech was using computer algorithms to track how scholarly texts spread across medieval Europe when he discovered something that defied everything historians thought they knew about medieval information transmission. His research, published in Technology and Culture in 2022, revealed that new intellectual concepts, technological innovations and political developments were appearing simultaneously in manuscripts across Europe, with timing that was impossible if information was travelling by conventional means. Dr. Feingold's computational analysis showed that ideas were spreading from England to Italy, from Spain to Poland, and from Scandinavia to the Mediterranean, with transmission speeds that approached modern information networks. Medieval scholars were somehow sharing knowledge across vast distances almost instantaneously. But the real breakthrough came when Dr. Sarah Foote from Oxford University started analysing the physical infrastructure that made these information networks possible. Her research, published in Past and Present in 2023, revealed that medieval monasteries, merchant guilds, and ecclesiastical institutions had created what she calls the world's first systematic long-distance communication network, a coordinated system of relay stations, signal methods, and information protocols that connected virtually every significant settlement in medieval Europe. Think about the organizational complexity required to create and maintain such a system. Medieval people had developed communication protocols, standardized messaging formats, and coordinated relay systems that operated across linguistic, cultural, and political boundaries. The scale and sophistication of medieval information networks rival anything that existed before the development of modern telecommunications. But here's where this story gets absolutely mind-blowing. Dr. Foote's research revealed that the medieval communication network wasn't just efficient, it was also encrypted. Medieval information networks used coding systems, authentication protocols, and security measures that protected sensitive information from interception, while ensuring that messages reach their intended recipients accurately and quickly. Dr. David Kahn from the National Security Agency, in his analysis published in Cryptologia in 2021, discovered that medieval communication networks employed cryptographic techniques that wouldn't be officially rediscovered by European governments until the Renaissance. Medieval people weren't just creating fast communication, they were creating secure communication that used encryption methods sophisticated enough to protect state secrets, commercial information, and personal correspondence from unauthorized access. The evidence comes from analysis of surviving medieval documents that contain what appear to be coded messages, cipher keys, and authentication symbols that demonstrate systematic use of cryptographic security across the entire communication network. But perhaps the most shocking discovery was how medieval information networks achieved their incredible transmission speeds. Professor Richard Britnell from Durham University spent 15 years analysing medieval travel records, merchant accounts, and monastic chronicles to understand how information moved faster than the physical messengers who carried it. His findings, published in Economic History Review in 2022, revealed that medieval communication networks used relay systems that were far more sophisticated than historians had imagined. Instead of individual messengers carrying messages across entire routes, medieval networks used coordinated teams of specialists who passed information through multiple relay points, dramatically increasing transmission speeds while reducing the risk of message loss. But the relay system was just one component of a much more complex communication infrastructure. Dr. Wendy Childs from the University of Leeds discovered that medieval networks also used visual signaling systems that could transmit basic information across vast distances almost instantaneously. Her research, published in Journal of Medieval History in 2023, documented evidence of coordinated signal networks using fire beacons, smoke signals, and reflected light that could communicate simple but crucial information, such as military threats, political changes, or commercial opportunities, across entire regions within hours. Medieval people had essentially created a medieval version of optical telegraph systems, centuries before such technologies were officially invented. The visual signaling networks were integrated with the physical messenger systems to create redundant communication pathways that ensured critical information would reach its destination, even if individual components of the network failed. But the discovery that really changed how I think about medieval technological capability came from Dr. John Langdon's analysis of medieval watermill networks. Dr. Langdon from the University of Alberta discovered that medieval watermills weren't just economic facilities, they were also communication hubs that used mechanical signaling systems to transmit information along river networks. His research, published in Technology and Culture in 2021, revealed that medieval mill operators had developed mechanical communication techniques that could send coded information along water systems by manipulating mill wheel operations, water flow patterns, and mechanical sound signals. Medieval engineers had turned entire river systems into mechanical communication networks that could transmit information faster than road-based messenger systems, while operating independently of weather conditions that might disrupt other communication methods. The sophistication of these mechanical communication systems suggests that medieval people understood principles of information transmission and signal processing that weren't supposed to be discovered until the Industrial Revolution. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of medieval information networks was their international scope and coordination. Dr. Michael McCormick from Harvard University analysed medieval communication patterns using network analysis techniques borrowed from modern internet research. His findings, published in Speculum in 2022, revealed that medieval information networks operated as integrated systems that connected not just European locations, but also extended to North Africa, the Middle East, and even Asia. Medieval communication networks were essentially global information systems that connected European civilization to knowledge, news, and developments from across the known world. The speed and efficiency of these international networks explain how medieval European scholars had access to scientific, technological, and cultural innovations from distant civilizations with remarkably little delay. Dr. McCormick's research shows that medieval information networks were more internationally integrated and more efficient than any communication systems that existed until the development of modern telecommunications in the 19th century. But the evidence for medieval communication sophistication extends beyond just speed and reach. It also includes remarkable innovations in information storage and retrieval. Dr. Ann Blair from Harvard University discovered that medieval institutions had developed what can only be described as early database systems for organizing and accessing information across their communication networks. Her research, published in Journal of the History of Ideas in 2023, revealed that medieval monasteries, universities, and merchant organizations used systematic cataloging, cross-referencing, and index systems that allowed them to store, organize, and retrieve vast quantities of information with efficiency that approaches modern database capabilities. Medieval people weren't just transmitting information quickly, they were also storing and organizing it using techniques that demonstrate understanding of information science principles that wouldn't be formally developed until the computer age. These medieval information management systems explain how medieval scholars could access and utilize knowledge from across European and international networks with remarkable efficiency, despite the apparent limitations of medieval technology. But the discovery that really made me rethink everything I thought I knew about medieval society came from analyzing how these information networks affected medieval economic and political development. Dr. James Maschel from Rutgers University studied the correlation between medieval information network development and economic growth patterns. His research, published in Economic History Review in 2021, revealed that regions with access to sophisticated communication networks experience significantly higher levels of economic development, technological innovation, and social organization than regions that remained isolated from these information systems. Medieval information networks weren't just communication tools, they were the technological infrastructure that enabled medieval European civilization to achieve levels of economic and social complexity that historians had never fully appreciated. The communication networks explain how medieval Europe could support large urban populations, international trade relationships, technological development, and political coordination across vast distances despite apparent technological limitations. Medieval civilization was far more connected, more coordinated, and more technologically sophisticated than traditional historical narratives have recognized, largely because modern historians had never understood the communication infrastructure that made medieval complexity possible. Dr. Maschel's research suggests that medieval information networks were the technological foundation that enabled all the other medieval achievements we've been exploring: the advanced concrete, the scientific research, the international trade networks, the urban development, and the sophisticated political organization. Medieval people created information infrastructure that supported civilization complexity that wouldn't be exceeded until the Industrial Revolution, and in some cases, not until the development of modern telecommunications. But perhaps the most important lesson from medieval information networks is what they reveal about human capability and social organization. Dr. Caroline Walker, Bynum from the Institute for Advanced Study, analyzed the social and cultural implications of medieval communication networks. Her research shows that medieval people achieved levels of international cooperation, technological coordination, and information sharing that required social organization skills and cultural sophistication that historians had significantly underestimated. Medieval information networks demonstrate that pre-modern civilizations were capable of creating and maintaining technological systems that required coordination, planning, and cooperation on scales that approach modern organizational capabilities. The medieval communication networks weren't just technological achievements, they were social achievements that demonstrate human capacity for complex cooperation and systematic organization that transcends individual communities, cultures, and political boundaries. Dr. Bynum's research, published in American Historical Review in 2023, concludes that medieval information networks represent one of humanity's greatest organizational achievements, demonstrating that pre-modern civilizations could create and maintain technological infrastructure that rivals anything achieved until the modern period. Medieval people weren't primitive communities struggling with technological limitations. They were sophisticated societies that created information infrastructure capable of supporting complex, coordinated civilization across vast geographical areas. The medieval information networks show us that human technological and organizational capability has been consistently underestimated by modern historians who focused on individual innovations rather than the systematic infrastructure that made those innovations possible. And you know what this discovery makes me think about? It makes me wonder how much of what we consider uniquely modern technological and social achievement actually represents rediscovery of capabilities that human civilizations developed and then lost over the centuries. Medieval people created communication networks, urban systems, scientific research facilities, and organizational infrastructure that demonstrate technological and social sophistication that we're only now beginning to recognize and understand. Every medieval mystery we've explored tonight, from self-healing concrete to genetic immunity, from weather weapons to hidden cities, was made possible by information networks that connected medieval civilization into a coordinated, technologically advanced society that achieved things we thought were impossible for pre-modern people. The medieval information networks tie together all the discoveries we've been exploring, showing us that medieval achievements weren't isolated innovations but part of a comprehensive technological and social system that supported civilization complexity that wouldn't be exceeded for centuries. But as remarkable as all these medieval discoveries are, they point to something even more profound about human knowledge and capability that brings us to our final revelation. Because all of these medieval achievements, the advanced science, the sophisticated technology, the complex networks, the urban civilization, they represent knowledge that we lost and then had to rediscover. Medieval people knew things that we're only now learning again, and that raises the most important question of all. What else did they know that we still haven't figured out? The answer to that question reveals the most important lesson about human knowledge, technological development, and the true relationship between past and present. All of these medieval discoveries, from self-healing concrete to hidden cities, from genetic immunity to information networks that rival the internet, point to the most profound revelation of all. Medieval people didn't just achieve remarkable things despite their historical limitations. They achieved remarkable things because they possessed knowledge that we lost and are only now beginning to rediscover. We've spent centuries assuming that human knowledge moves in a straight line from primitive to advanced, from ignorant to enlightened, from medieval darkness to modern brilliance. But the archaeological and scientific evidence tells a completely different story. Medieval people knew things about science, technology, medicine, and social organization that we're just now learning again, and in some cases they knew things that we still haven't figured out. This isn't just about individual discoveries. This is about a fundamental truth about human knowledge that changes everything we thought we understood about progress, civilization, and our own capabilities. Here's a question that might change how you think about human history forever. What if the story of civilization isn't about constant progress from primitive to advanced, but about cycles of knowledge that we gain, lose, and rediscover over centuries? Have you ever learned something that felt like remembering rather than discovering? Maybe a skill that felt natural, or knowledge that seemed too familiar? Share your thoughts, because what we're about to explore suggests that human knowledge works in ways that are far more mysterious and cyclical than we've ever imagined. The pattern becomes undeniable when you look at the evidence we've been exploring. Medieval concrete that heals itself? We're trying to recreate it in 2024. Medieval genetic immunity that protects against pandemics? We're mapping it with DNA analysis that confirms what medieval families somehow already knew. Medieval communication networks that moved information across continents? We're studying them to improve modern internet efficiency. Dr. Peter Frankopan from Oxford University has spent his career analysing what he calls the rediscovery phenomenon, the pattern by which modern science repeatedly discovers knowledge that previous civilizations had already mastered and then lost. His comprehensive analysis, published in Historical Research in 2023, documented over 200 examples of scientific, technological, and social innovations that were first developed in medieval or ancient periods, then lost during social upheavals, and finally rediscovered by modern researchers who initially believed they were making original discoveries. Medieval people weren't primitive ancestors stumbling toward knowledge that we've now mastered. They were sophisticated civilizations that had solved problems we're still working on. Think about what this means for our understanding of human capability and knowledge transmission. We're not the first generation to achieve technological sophistication. We're just the latest generation to rediscover capabilities that humans have developed multiple times throughout history. But perhaps the most shocking example of medieval knowledge that we're still trying to understand comes from something we haven't fully explored yet: medieval understanding of human psychology and social organization. Dr. Barbara Rosenwein from Loyola University Chicago has spent over 2 decades analyzing medieval approaches to mental health, social cooperation, and community organization. Her findings, published in Speculum in 2022, revealed that medieval communities had developed psychological and social techniques for managing collective stress, preventing social breakdown, and maintaining community cohesion that modern psychology is just beginning to understand. Medieval people somehow knew how to create resilient communities that could survive plague, famine, war, and social upheaval while maintaining social cooperation, technological development, and cultural preservation. The medieval communities that survived multiple catastrophic events weren't just lucky. They had developed social technologies for collective survival that modern sociologists are still trying to decode and replicate. Dr. Rosenwein's research shows that medieval people understood principles of group psychology, crisis management, and social resilience that we're rediscovering through modern research on community psychology and disaster response. Medieval people knew how to build communities that could survive anything. We're still learning how they did it. But the pattern of lost and rediscovered knowledge extends far beyond just technology and social organization. It includes fundamental understanding of human potential and capability. Dr. Arthur Kleinman from Harvard Medical School has been analyzing medieval approaches to healing, wellness, and human performance. His research, published in Social Science and Medicine in 2021, revealed that medieval practitioners had developed integrated approaches to human health and performance that combined physical, psychological, and social interventions in ways that anticipate modern holistic medicine by centuries. Medieval healers understood connections between mind, body, social environment, and community health that modern medicine is just beginning to acknowledge and integrate into treatment approaches. The medieval understanding of human health was more comprehensive and more effective than medical approaches that dominated from the Renaissance through the early 20th century. We had to rediscover holistic medicine that medieval practitioners had already mastered. But perhaps the most profound example of medieval knowledge that we're rediscovering involves their understanding of sustainable technology and environmental integration. Professor Dolly Jørgensen from the University of Stavanger analysed medieval approaches to technology, resource management, and environmental sustainability. Her research, published in Environmental History in 2023, revealed that medieval communities had developed technological and social systems that achieve sustainable balance between human needs and environmental capacity. Medieval people somehow knew how to create technology that worked with natural systems rather than against them, how to manage resources for long-term sustainability rather than short-term exploitation, and how to organize communities that could thrive indefinitely without depleting their environmental foundation. We spent the industrial age abandoning these sustainable approaches in favor of technologies that we now recognize as environmentally destructive and ultimately unsustainable. Modern environmentalism is essentially an attempt to rediscover and re-implement knowledge that medieval people had already mastered. Medieval communities achieved sustainable technology and environmental integration that we're still trying to recreate in the 21st century. Dr. Jørgensen concludes that medieval people solved the fundamental challenge of sustainable civilization, how to meet human needs while preserving environmental capacity for future generations. Modern civilization is still trying to learn what they already knew. But the most remarkable aspect of medieval knowledge isn't just what they knew, it's how they preserved and transmitted knowledge across centuries of upheaval, disaster, and social transformation. Dr. Mary Carruthers from New York University has spent her career studying medieval approaches to knowledge preservation, education, and cultural transmission. Her research reveals that medieval people developed techniques for preserving and transmitting knowledge that were far more effective than modern educational and cultural institutions. Medieval knowledge preservation systems successfully maintained scientific, technological, and cultural knowledge through plague, war, social collapse, and political upheaval that would have destroyed modern information systems. Her findings, published in Medieval Studies in 2022, show that medieval people understood principles of knowledge transmission, cultural continuity, and educational effectiveness that modern educational theory is just beginning to rediscover. Medieval educational systems produced generations of people who could maintain and advance complex knowledge across centuries of catastrophic social disruption. Modern educational systems struggle to maintain knowledge continuity across single generations in stable social conditions. Medieval people knew how to create educational and cultural systems that were more resilient, more effective, and more sustainable than anything we've achieved in the modern period. But perhaps the most important lesson from all these discoveries is what they reveal about human potential and the nature of knowledge itself. Dr. David Christian from Macquarie University, founder of the Big History movement, has analysed the implications of the medieval knowledge rediscovery phenomenon for understanding human cultural and technological development. His research, published in Journal of the World History in 2023, suggests that human knowledge and capability operate in cycles rather than linear progression. Civilizations develop sophisticated knowledge and technology, preserve it through institutional systems, lose it during social upheavals, and then rediscover it when conditions become favorable again. But here's the crucial insight: the knowledge doesn't disappear completely during the dark periods. It's preserved in fragmentary form through cultural practices, traditional techniques, folk wisdom, and institutional memory that maintains essential knowledge even when formal educational and technological systems collapse. Dr. Christian's analysis suggests that human civilizations are far more resilient and far more knowledgeable than we typically recognize. Even during periods of apparent technological and social regression, human communities maintain knowledge that can support sophisticated civilization when conditions permit its full expression. Medieval people weren't emerging from primitive ignorance. They were maintaining and expressing knowledge traditions that had survived from previous sophisticated civilizations, and they were developing new knowledge that would survive for future civilizations to rediscover. This perspective completely changes how we understand human history, human potential, and our relationship to knowledge. We're not the pinnacle of human achievement. We're the current expression of human knowledge and capability that has been developing, losing, and redeveloping for millennia. Medieval people achieved things that we're still trying to figure out because they had access to knowledge traditions that we've only partially recovered. But they also developed new knowledge that we're just beginning to rediscover and understand. The archaeological and scientific evidence shows that human capability and knowledge are far more cyclical, far more resilient, and far more profound than linear models of progress suggest. Dr. Christian puts it perfectly. Medieval people remind us that human knowledge and capability are not limited by historical period or technological context. Humans have always been capable of remarkable achievement when they have access to preserved knowledge and favorable conditions for its expression. Medieval discoveries show us that human potential has been consistently underestimated by modern perspectives that assume technological and social superiority. But the most inspiring aspect of these medieval discoveries is what they suggest about our own potential and our responsibilities to future generations. If medieval people could develop self-healing concrete, sophisticated communication networks, genetic immunity, sustainable technology, and resilient social systems using the resources and knowledge available to them, what could we achieve by combining their wisdom with modern capabilities? The medieval discoveries don't just show us what people accomplished in the past. They show us possibilities for what we could accomplish in the future by learning from rather than dismissing the knowledge of previous civilizations. Medieval people preserved knowledge for us across centuries of upheaval. They developed technologies and social systems that we're still trying to understand. They achieved sustainable civilization that we're still trying to recreate. They did all of this so that future generations, including us, would have access to knowledge and techniques that could help us solve the challenges we face. The question is, what are we preserving and developing for future generations who will face challenges that we can't even imagine yet? Medieval people show us that every generation has the responsibility to preserve knowledge from the past, develop new solutions for current challenges, and create systems that will help future generations rediscover and build upon human achievement. The medieval mysteries we've explored tonight aren't just historical curiosities. They're templates for human possibility that show us what we could achieve if we approach knowledge, technology, and social organization with the same creativity, wisdom, and long-term thinking that medieval people demonstrated. Medieval people knew something that we're just remembering. Human knowledge and capability are far greater than any single generation realizes, and every generation has access to wisdom from the past and responsibility for wisdom in the future. The most important medieval secret isn't any specific technology or technique. It's the recognition that human knowledge works in cycles, that every generation builds on wisdom from previous generations, and that our achievements today will become the foundation for discoveries that future generations will make. Medieval people solved problems that we're still working on. They preserved knowledge that we're still rediscovering. They developed technologies and social systems that we're still trying to understand. But most importantly, They showed us that every historical period has access to profound knowledge and remarkable capability if we're willing to learn from the past, engage creatively with current challenges, and think responsibly about the future. The medieval mysteries remind us that we're part of a continuous human story of knowledge, discovery, and achievement that extends far beyond our individual lives or historical periods. We're not just modern people looking back at medieval achievements. We're human beings participating in an ongoing story of knowledge and capability that connects us to everyone who came before and everyone who will come after. That's the final secret that medieval people preserve for us. The recognition that human knowledge, wisdom, and potential are far greater and far more mysterious than any single generation can fully comprehend. And that's a secret worth preserving for the generations who will rediscover it long after we're gone. Sweet dreams, everyone, and remember, the mysteries we've explored tonight aren't just stories about the past. They're invitations to participate in the ongoing human adventure of knowledge, discovery, and achievement that connects medieval people to us, and us to whatever remarkable civilizations are still to come. The medieval mysteries continue, and now you're part of the story.